Okay, welcome to Summoning Insight episode, I think 14. I think that's about right. On this episode, I'm Thorin, as usual, work for On Gamers. Fingers crossed that remains the case when this comes out. But you never know in this esports landscape. My host, as usual, is MonteCristo, who's now returned to Korea. He's gradually learning to favor Koreans over North Americans, to hate the country of his birth and freedom and, you know, the Enlightenment ideals of Thomas Paine and the founders of the US. How are you doing, Monty?
That's right. I'm slowly getting more angry at Thomas Jefferson as we speak, and I feel good about kimchi.
I'm glad you said chi at the end of that statement there. Okay, so usually, you know the score. When we start this show, I sort of introduce the guest each week. Because they're a guest and we're very hospitable, I insult them and imply that their career has been shit and that they're worse than they actually are. But what people don't realize is I actually do that because I always pick people where their players we're friendly with and everyone usually talks them up to the heavens, you know? So we jibe with them a little bit, we break the ice a little bit. But this time, I will actually start things like a gentleman, and I'll say that actually the guest this week is Kelsey Moser, and she's my favorite writer in esports. Which is quite a standard, actually, because I think most writers are shit. Get at me. But she's pretty good. Just check out her stuff. She writes about Chinese LOL. She writes for Paravine, LOL Esports. Also, hopefully, On Gamers continuing onwards. Maybe many others. I don't know. They're the ones I read. And then sometimes she does this talk show called China Talk. Great name for a talk show. It's about Chinese LOL. And it's sort of like this show, except if there was like 5 Monties, no Thorin, and like a fifth of the viewers. But some people, that's an ideal world, you know. Some people would love this world. But so we'll see how it goes here, because I'll set this episode up as we start now. Every time Monty says something that's like a strong opinion, but the fan base will all agree with it, I'm sort of like, okay, well, you know, I can't always argue everything against Monty. I don't always have good points. So what I have to do is I have to find like a worthy challenger. I have to go around the land and I have to seek out someone who's been training the technique of one sword fighting, you know, for years secretly. And then I'm gonna bring them up and they're gonna challenge Monty at his unassailable throne of Lord Monty, you know. He's on that like faker throne from the winter promo. So on this episode, we're gonna mainly talk about Chinese LOL to begin with. And so the reason why I want to discuss this topic is because when I watch Chinese LOL, I'll just put it like this. I go, wow, this is so exciting. Like, obviously, these are really skilled players. Like, I'm in awe of how amazing some of like the AD carries are, the mechanical level of the play. The games, considering how good they are, it's not like, for example, EU, where it's like a kind of a standard template and it's less action and you kind of have an idea when things are going to happen. It's like it can be furious action all the time. It can be wait for one big, insane apocalyptic battle at the end of the game. But Monty and his love of like the fundamentals of the game, the way the game should be played, he's sort of like one of those basketball coaches who's like, listen, I just want you to play the right way. Trust your teammates. Pass the ball movement, get it to the open man, shoot the shot, work on your free throws. Meanwhile, you know,
no dunks. Yeah. I hate dunks.
Meanwhile, as a fan, I just want to go like, no, just give it to Kobe and let him just score like 50 points and then, you know, fuck the Lakers. Who even cares if they lose? I saw a show, you know. So what I want to ask is, let's set the baseline here, Monty. When you think of Chinese LOL, you're kind of critical of it, right? It's not that good compared to what it could be, right?
It is surprising the level that it is at, considering the talent that exists in China. And I mean, we've seen kind of time and time again that the Chinese teams they can't really hold their own against like Korean strategy, even though if we look at their individual mechanics, absolutely outstanding. And their team fighting, outstanding. It's just that there's something missing in terms of that big picture strategy, and it's really weird. And it's also really weird that they've started importing Korean players. I don't really get that either.
When you saw, when you say that like the standard maybe isn't where it should be, how would before we compare to Korea, which is like the gold standard, how does it compare to NA and EU right now? Do you think what you've seen of the Chinese scene?
I mean, it's hard to say because we don't actually get that much crossover at the given time. And of course, when we have 3 Chinese teams instead of just 2 at Worlds this year, we have the 3 NA and we have the 3 EU and the 3 Korea. I think we'll have a lot more questions answered about that. But I mean, at All Stars, when we did see Cloud9 with the substitute playing pretty well against OMG, who at the time was way up there with EDG as the top teams in China, it looked like NA could be competitive with the top Chinese teams.
What is your sense, Kelsey? Where do you think China stacks up just against NA and EU at the moment?
I think that OMG was also playing with a substitute. That's my feeling on the issue. Xiyang, like, what he did was really impressive. Because, like, I watched an episode of Summoning Insight where you had Loco Doco and you're like, name an NA player that just came out of solo queue and destroyed everyone. Well, Xiyang is like that player in China. He literally had no competitive experience, and he was just able to win 1v1 lanes against people in China. And a lot of people even at All-Stars. But, like, he had no experience with jungle pressure at all because there was this 4VO meta where the jungler was always tied off in the side of the lane. So all Bengi really had to do was just, like, gank him, and he was completely out of his comfort zone. Like, it's really bizarre to say that, and I think it goes back to what Monty's point was about how strategically they're just, like, bizarrely behind. That, like, you can say that this guy played competitively for an entire split in LPL without having experience with junglers ganking mid lane, but you can actually say that. It's really bizarre. So I feel like Cool is also kind of behind, and so this is an issue, but going forward, OMG and Cloud9, in my mind, both were playing with substitutes. They both weren't the best teams that they could be at the time, and I'm really excited to see them play again. But I personally think that Chinese teams, if you just look at, like, raw mechanical talent, will beat EU and NA even if they have better strategy, which they might not at the time. Because of all the stuff that's happening in China, but I'm not going to say that yet.
So Monty, respond to that. I mean, if Dignitas, if CLG, if Cloud9 go up against, OMG or EDG, whoever the best team is at the time, what do you think of what she's saying here, that they might lose just because of the raw mechanical ability of the Chinese teams?
it's definitely a possibility, but there are also ways you can exploit the Chinese teams in terms of they don't react particularly well to split pushing. They always want to group and fight, and so if you can bait them and just give them the runaround around the map, you can just take their towers, and they don't seem to be able to do much about that. So, I mean, going into the game, like if you're coming into a game plan in terms of strategically against China, I don't think it's wise as a Western team to fight them on the field of their strengths, which is that team fighting and that raw mechanical ability. So it would look, I think, a little bit different, and we'd probably see some very specific strats developed in order to deal with the Chinese teams and put them outside of their comfort zone. So it's hard to tell, but I'm really excited. This is like a big question too, because there is so much talent in that region, and you have to imagine that sooner rather than later, they're actually going to get their shit together and be a legitimate threat, because they have all the pieces, which is why I think it's so odd that they're importing kind of older, kind of brink of retirement Korean players, or players that never really had a chance to make it, because in the case of China, they have this massive talent pool, and that's not really going to help solve their problem so much. Bringing over some of the Korean coaching staff, I think, is more on the level. But at the same time, I don't even think that they have to do that. I think that they just need to buckle down and dedicate more time to watching film of other regions and seriously studying the game and trying to adapt that play, or ask themselves questions as to why other regions are doing things. And to me, in my mind, it seems like that's what's not happening right now with the Chinese teams.
Okay, so we'll get to the issue of them bringing Koreans in, because I want to get Kelsey on this second, but when you say that, Monty, you described it there in a way where if you had like a chalkboard as you were outlining that to me, I'd be like, okay, all adds up, you're right, NA should beat China. But then when you said, okay, the conditions, like, as long as they don't fight them on the ground of where they want to fight, suddenly I started thinking of all these times you've described to me, like the strategy of how CLG would play a game. And you were like, okay, but we would have won if we hadn't have taken that team fight with, like, Dignitas over here. And it's like, that's sort of always been the NA problem, right? Like, even if they had a chance to, like, split push and win the game, or maybe if they can just disengage the whole time and force a fight on their ground, instead, NA's sort of like that guy where it's like, if you want to beat someone who is, like, stronger and bigger than you, okay, and he's in a bar, you should probably wait till he's looking the other way, then just sucker punch him, like right in his nuts or something, and then just start kicking him when he's on the ground. If instead you walk up to him, like, you know in Superman 2, when Superman gets his powers taken away, and he still thinks of himself as Superman, right? So he's in this diner, and this real asshole comes in, who's like a real tough guy who's bullying people around. And so rather than just like hit this guy in the back of the head and drag him out, Superman walks up as Clark Kent, you know, and he just sort of taps him on the shoulder and says, "Excuse me, sir, I'd like you to come outside so we can talk about this." Like, sort of just openly challenging him to a fight. And so obviously that guy then just beats the shit out of him, like, straight up. That's kind of like the problem I see NA having, because I can imagine some uber Chinese, like, team fighting team, and then they're just, like, waiting around the Baron, and then NA's like, yeah, fuck it, let's just go for a fight around the Baron, shall we? Like, wouldn't this happen?
No, I totally agree. And not only that what you're saying, but that's exactly actually what happened at All Stars, right? Especially in the game that OMG, the playoff game after the group stage, that OMG, the first game where it was a very close game, but Cloud9 had an advantage. And they could have kept split pushing with Jax, and then they took a random fight that was not a good decision and subsequently lost. So yes, what you're absolutely right. What I'm saying does, simplify some of these issues, but we know what those issues are. Now, executing them, that's an entirely different thing. But do I think it's possible that NA teams can hang in there with Chinese teams? I do. But it is, I think Kelsey's absolutely right, that it is kind of a difficult barrier to overcome just because they are so good mechanically.
So I've got this topic still in mind, okay, Kelsey. Did you have something to respond on what you said there, by the way?
Yeah. I mean, I think also it can't be understated that I feel like OMG learned really quickly. Like, the Morgana pick they banned out. And then, of course, I don't know why they weren't continuously banning it from IEM, and they had been playing it a little bit in LPL. But they banned out the Morgana pick, which was giving them trouble. And then they were able to, like, the first set that they played against Cloud9, first of all, like, they apologized to fans for not taking it seriously. But the map, and this is my biggest problem with Chinese LoL, is, like, their understanding of vision control and just, like, put a fucking ward down. Like,
yeah. It's not good.
Yeah, but, so they were able to ward, and so, like, Sneaky's positioning on Twitch wasn't actually that good against OMG, so the fact that they could just have wards down and catch him out was something that they actually learned between the group stage and the bracket set. So I think that considering that All-Stars is, Worlds is long, there's like that element that comes into play, and the fact that I always tell people this is the most exciting time to get into LPL because I feel like the Korean players and the Korean coaches are bringing like this element of just dedication and study. Like, that's always their big thing, is that, like, EDG's manager, Sancho, and you said we get into this later, actually said that he wants Korean players because he feels like their mindset is better for the game, in terms of, like, Chinese people just want to retire almost as soon as they start playing. But it's...
Because they can't make money?
Yeah.
Because I talked to Tabe extensively about this at Worlds, and it's really messed up, actually.
Yeah, it is. So, like, that's kind of that's part of the issue. And, like, again, some of those conditions are improving and changing. Some details I don't know confirmed, but there are definitely, like, people are talking about different players making more money now. Streaming platforms are a big thing. And the amount of money players can make for streaming is increasing. Because the streaming platforms there are, like, so many in China, and they're all competing. But that's a separate issue, but yeah, so it's interesting, but I think that there are a lot of variables right now about when we talk about China strategically, that I almost feel like, okay, if you missed Korea rising to power, this is your chance to, like, watch another region.
Okay, so give us an example
in that regard. So, like, last split, I felt like their problem was not warding at all. Like, we saw EDG give up free dragons just to Elise, like, soloing dragon. Just taking it against Invictus Gaming, like, their very first game. They didn't have wards on the map at all for, like, 20 minutes. And I think a big part of it was, it's not like we saw China play games at Worlds, and they used wards, right? In the Season 3 World Championships, yeah. Like, even Mithy came on the show and talked about how he felt like he learned a bit about deep warding from LoveLin, who went into the jungle and like put down wards, and they just like forgot how to do that. But I think it was part of like the patch. The new season changes came to China like months later, and OMG, who's usually the front runners in kind of dictating strategy and to Chinese players, was more trying to figure out how to play with a new player than try to how to catch up on the patch. So I think that actually took a huge hit to some of their strategical development and some of the way they were playing. Not to say that they were like caught up to Korea strategically at Worlds, because obviously that wasn't the case, but they weren't like as significantly behind in terms of not knowing how to use a ward. And EDG was a new team, and they were very uncertain, and a lot of their game was based on and they had a lot of external pressure from like drama and a bunch of other stuff. So they were just, it was very obvious in their early games that they just didn't know what they were doing, or they were afraid to screw up. So they would fall behind like 10,000 or so gold and just like come back because they were so good at team fighting, and their team was pretty much structured around each person having like a role in team fight, that kind of thing. So there are a lot of factors, but ultimately, like, no one knew how to ward. And you can debate about why that is the case, obviously, but they gave up those situations, and that was the problem last split. The problem this split is that they don't know where to ward. So they'll ward, but it'll be in, like, really awkward places. Like, they'll have, like, 2 wards in the same bush giving, like, the same coverage, or they'll just be like, okay, you can almost hear the conversation. It's like, oh, I have wards, put them down. Where? I don't know, just put them down. So they're learning some of the tricks to vision by just trial and error, and they at least don't fall prey as much to, as I say this, I think about the Invictus Gaming versus LGD game, where there was, like, a huge issue with Baron throws and Baron vision. But that wasn't related to vision as much, where like there aren't games where teams just win because Baron is they have Baron warded as much anymore this split. Like, that, I think, speaks a lot about watching the region develop in terms of that.
So I have a question here that'll lead off of that, but first I want to ask Monty a quick question before we leave the topic of comparing them to NA. Riddle me this, Monty. So you're thinking of the potential of what the teams could do in NA tactically and overcome these Chinese top players. We're talking about players like Name, who I've heard even like some Korean players say, like, this guy might be as good as like the best Korean AD carries. So riddle me this, Monty.
He's very good.
Okay. Yeah. Here's the riddle for you. Here's the conundrum, okay? So NA right now, their top teams could potentially beat the top teams in China. But here's the problem. I'm looking at the LCS standings right now, and the 6th best team from China upgraded their top laner, and they're tied for top in LCS NA.
Well, to be fair, LMQ had an initial surge, and they definitely have been kind of falling off recently. They haven't looked anywhere near as strong as they did at the beginning of the split. And as a team, I think they're kind of one-dimensional, and they do sort of play like a lot of the other Chinese teams do, too, with a big emphasis on farming and team fighting over kind of more complex strategy. And I think that initially caught a lot of teams off guard, but they've been looking more and more, I think, vulnerable as the split has dragged on. Yes, in the past couple weeks, all the teams have been going 1-1, so nobody's surpassed them yet, but I do think they're kind of on a downswing right now. And, you say LMQ, yeah, they replaced their top laner with a guy who played in the last World Championship. Ackerman is not a bad top laner by any means, so I think you can take a look at that as an upgrade in
Kelsey,
a lot of ways.
Okay, were you finished on that point? Sorry.
Yeah, go for
okay.
it.
Kelsey, LMQ wouldn't be like top 2 in LPL if they came back right now, would they? What do you think realistically of their team? Evaluate them for us.
Okay, so it's actually really hard because people point out, oh, they upgraded their top laner, but they also downgraded their AD carry. They switched out their mid laner to a sub. Zhao was considered like too bad to even be in LPL.
3-time MVP of LCS NA?
Yeah.
Whatever, just keep going.
So, it's like very interesting, and people always tell me, do you think they've improved, since they've been in NA? Like, do you think they've gotten better? And it's like really hard to gauge because they don't look better. They look like they're trying, like they've done some cool things. Like they had one pretty interesting Baron ward I saw in one of their games. That was like not in a normal place where you'd look for wards, and I thought, oh, okay, China could actually benefit from something like that if they had a ward like that. But in general, they play like they don't. I feel first of all they don't team fight as well as the other Chinese teams, and that's like a really big point that they come up. They mistime like some of their abilities in ways that EDG and OMG, for example, like just because they're so coordinated on that level and are able to win team fights like from huge gold disadvantages just because they team fight so well, they wouldn't do that. And I also feel like one point I want to stress is that if North American teams go to Worlds expecting LPL teams there to play like LMQ, they're going and create strategies like from that perspective, they're going to lose, because I don't think like OMG's past few games have not looked anything like the way LMQ has been playing. So
how do they win games then if it's not just because everyone assumes it's like they just win the team fights, they just bully you around with mechanics and stuff?
So I do think, of course, as I mentioned, the team fights are a huge factor. But some of the things that OMG has been doing, for example, is they've been thinking about how to use their players, like what they're good at. And like one thing, for example, is like Ggoong. I always stress like his role in a fight is you think of him, he's a very good 1v1 player. But he doesn't play like the normal, like very good 1v1 players like Flame or whatever, who calls the jungler up, tries to get really fed. He plays such that he's trying to just take pressure off the map in any way he can, or spread pressure. And that's something that a lot of Chinese players might not necessarily think about, or that LMQ might not necessarily think about. So he'll take some advantage in lane, and then he'll go and invade the buff, and he'll have, like he had Xiyang last split, or he'll have Cool come with him. And I think one thing that was missing from OMG strategy is that Cool will be very similar in that regard. And LoveLin, like Alan, Drug, whatever you want to call him, will go into the enemy jungler, and he has like gotten better about warding again. I don't know why he knows how to ward as a jungler but not as a support. It's really bizarre. But the way that OMG used to function last summer, and the way they've started to function again, is he will place wards so that Cool can roam in the jungler with vision of what the enemy jungle is doing, and he can go and he'll play like assassins have gotten popular again in LPL, and I think part of that is because Cool is back, though there are a lot more assassin players in LPL this split as well, with like Corn and Mykles. But he will go to different lanes given the vision, and he'll put pressure there. He'll push out the wave, or he'll go kill someone, or whatever it is that he does. And he'll use that vision, and that's something that's like really reminiscent of old OMG, but also really refreshing within the context of the current LPL season, that I think you wouldn't expect from playing against LMQ.
So Monty, I remember at the Season 3 Worlds, you're one of the people who was of the opinion that, okay, OMG might have been the second best team in that tournament, okay? Better than Royal Club, better than Najin Sword. You know, at least there's a debate could be made. Okay, so you actually had quite a high opinion of them, thought they were very good. And then I remember when the IEM World Championship came around, and we saw how underwhelming some of the names were doing from Europe, and there was only really Cloud9 was like only one of the top teams you could expect to do well. You even predicted, okay, maybe World Elite can win this, or you know they can do potentially very well. What's changed since this period of time coming into now? What is it that you've seen in China that isn't on the same level, you think, as the Western teams, or have the Western teams figured something out?
Well, first off, I think just NA in general is a lot stronger right now. I really think the level of competition has gone up significantly due to the concentration of talent and the fact that, you know, Dignitas adding these two solo laners and then adding the coaching staff and the infrastructure just becoming better across the board has helped NA get better overall. Not to say that China isn't getting better, but I have to question a lot of these Chinese moves that are happening too, because you know, if you look at the Korean players that China has got, these are not really A-listers. I mean, people get excited about Insec, but I think people forget that Insec had a very bad season. Very bad. In Masters he had the lowest KDA out of all 14 junglers. Like, he was not playing well. And to the degree that he could not find a Korean team that wanted to have him. Okay? So the fact that he went over, a little bit interesting. And then we have guys like Ninja and Axine. These are like C, D tier Korean players who are now doing and winning a lot of games in China. And these guys don't speak Chinese. In fact, I assume that most of their in-game communication is probably in English, because that's
and they don't speak English very well either.
Of course not. Right. So you have to ask, is this going to be, against a highly coordinated team with good comms, is this going to be an effective strategy? Can they have that level of synergy where it's just innate? Maybe. I don't know. But I do think that it makes things a lot more complicated in terms of calling complex rotations or warding patterns or whatever.
When you heard Insec was coming over, Kelsey, were you like everyone else who's like, oh, why not keep Chinese players? Why risk us? Do you think it's worked? Is it a good move?
Yeah, I think I had pretty much the same reaction. It was just, okay, I think Chinese players are really talented. I don't understand why they do this. And I think Hero was actually, like, World Elite's coach, was really instrumental in some of these moves initially, because he was in contact with Insec and other people, and then Insec actually was given the choice of some teams and chose to go with Starhorn. But the first time it went out was he made a post asking for Korean players to come try out for World Elite. And I think that's what really started the movement. And a lot of the times, like, the way the Chinese scene kind of works is they see someone else doing it and they immediately doing something. And this is, again, why, like, the meta changes in really interesting, like, jumps. As they see another team doing something and they sort of latch onto it, and that sort of was applied to bringing over Koreans. I think, like, in some cases it's been okay. Like Starhorn, for example, is a really weird example, because we talk about all this talent in China and all these, like, really good players, and some of their players were just bad. Like, I'm pretty confident in saying that, like, NCT, their top laner who became their mid laner, he would probably lose to Prawley. Like, that's not that's not, like, the worst thing I can say, but, like, he did not look good. And he got replaced by Korn, who was from the Chinese scene, of course, but then, like, their jungler was actually okay, but I think I'm moving around the point, and the real issue is that these Chinese teams were looking for a way to import Korean strategy, and they didn't know if, and one of the issues that I heard was happening is that some of the players were not initially willing to listen to these Korean coaches, because some of these Korean coaches were not able to demonstrate their skill in the game, like, convincingly, in such a way, so part of the reason this was part of the move to bring Korean players over was to get, like, someone who could move that kind of strategy, who could relate to them as players in, like, the same game. I think that was part of why this started. I think that it has its pros and cons. I think that, for example, like, they're looking into Korean junglers, and those are a lot of what has been brought over. And while they might not be the best mechanical players, they might understand, like, where to put vision, and they could teach Chinese junglers of some of these techniques. Like Clearlove, when I did an interview with some of EDG's members, said that he believes that Chinese junglers can be as good as Korean junglers, but they have to think about the game in a creative way, and he admires, like, that thought process. For example, Starhorn Royal Club is taking from their Korean players and their Korean coach this idea of the mentality of the dedication schedule. They've gone to the point of scheduling their meal times around when LPL will take place. So the idea of having the Koreans in the environment to set sort of this example that the Chinese players will follow is, I think, part of why importing these Korean players is attractive right now.
When you say that, that's one of the reasons why I could understand why they'd gamble on someone like Insec, even if he's not at his peak. Because one thing I've always wondered about the Chinese region, I want you to kind of address now, is considering they have these incredible players, like a very deep talent pool for all the positions and lots of teams as well, why is it that in terms of junglers, there's aside from when LoveLin went to jungle, I can think of no Chinese jungler who had like a legendary reputation, who was considered like a Diamond Prox or like a Bengi now or a Dandy. There was no one on that level. And likewise, okay, China is so famous for those bot lanes, the AD carries. But when you talk about the bot lane, it's a duo lane, right? Well, okay, yeah, the AD carries are really famous. They've got tons of those, Wei Zhao, all those. Aside from FZZF, I can't even think of a famous support player, except maybe Sicca in the end days. You know, people don't tend to talk about the support and the jungler, the two supportive roles which control the vision. These seem to be the roles which they were like undermanned at. Am I going too far with that?
I would say that the support role, people would talk about support players like Pyle, PYL. I've heard so many pronunciations of his names. Like LGT support player is considered very good mechanically, and both in terms of he's also the team's captain. LoveLin, when he played support, was considered like one of the better supports. Like last spring, they called FCZF and LoveLin like the best support players in China, or the Mad Lives of China, the support carries. Okay. There was let's think. Like last split in particular, there was a lot of people talking about all the good supports. Like even on Energy Pacemaker, people thought that Domox was like a very good Thresh player. And Energy Pacemaker was pretty bad. But
it sounds like at the moment, even these players are good in like the mechanical, or they play Thresh, or they're playmakers. Were they actually good as like classical supports, like support the AD carry, you do vision round there, so you get an advantage in the lane? Were they good at this aspect as well?
So I already said that, you know, Chinese players were really bad at vision, and like LoveLin as a support player was bad at vision. So there was that to consider. But in terms of like setting up plays, like, and I'll go back to SCZF because he was I thought his part of what made EDG so good was FCZF's sense of when to initiate a fight, like who to pick out, who to target. So he would get that target, and sometimes EDG would follow up and it would be a good fight, and sometimes like I felt like his initiation was on point and they were just hesitant. But he would pick a target and immediately like Clearlove would jump on them to assassinate them. Koro would like zone out the perfect targets that were going to do damage or disrupt the team, and then like you would create the zone with the AoE, and Name would just clean up, and the team fights went pretty seamlessly like that on a very consistent level. So the fact that so much pressure was put on FCZF for that initiations, and they did so well, speaks a lot for that type of game sense. And obviously we saw OMG at All-Stars, like people talked about LoveLin's Thresh play and the fact that they would have lost games if his Thresh death sentences didn't land perfectly or whatever. I'm not sure if I 100% agree with that, but I think he did play a pretty big role in a lot of those games. Like PYL on LGD is the captain, and right now I feel like LGD is not the best team, but some of their creativity and some of the games that they've come out with, like their dive comp versus Starhorn Royal Club in the first game, played to the team's strengths very well and ended up being very successful, and also did well in terms of map movements. So knowing that he's their captain makes me think that there is some of that there in the support role. But yeah, I would say that like the thing about the AD carries though, of course, is like what we were talking about. Of course, that's going to be considered perceived as the best role in China, because AD carries traditionally are not the ones who have to have the game sense. They just kind of follow people around and kill things. So of course that role's going to shine more than the other roles. And of course the jungle, who's going to require a lot of creativity and a lot of map movement, isn't going to look as good in China. So
what do you think, Monty? Because you once told me something along the lines of, just as like a facetious comment, you said something like in China there was like a unwritten agreement between all junglers not to gank bottom lane for like 40 minutes or something. Like, you know, you don't gank my AD carry, I won't gank yours, we'll let them get really big and they can fight it out, okay, right?
Then you just they have this epic apocalypse fight, right? But, so we have to get to 6 items. I mean, in my mind, like, at least last season in the LPL, EDG was super guilty of like these huge dragged out games where like they didn't seem to be able to snowball any early advantages whatsoever, and they would just sit there, and if you let them get past 35 minutes, you were going to have a bad time. But if you had an early advantage and you played it well against them, it was relatively easy to take them out because they lacked any kind of map movement before like half an hour. Really weird.
I always said pretty much that like the fact that the second best team in the regular season of LPL wins the game pretty much by doing nothing until Baron comes at like 40 minutes, warding Baron and then just like waiting, speaks a lot about where the region is strategically. But they also had the longest game time, average game time in LPL. And yeah, so that was like really awkward for them. And they, like I said, they fell behind in gold so much. And the fact that Ziggs was such a successful pick for them, like they just relied on that so hard. And I talked to you and he's like, I don't even like Ziggs. I hate that champion, you know. But he had to play it or they'd lose, right? But the thing is that I think a big part of that was Clearlove. The development that Clearlove has made throughout the split is pretty telling. Like in the playoffs, we saw him gank IG's lanes like repeatedly, right? The bottom lane. And the kids, Kog'Maw was just like really unhappy that entire game. And they actually used pink wards. I was like, oh my god, they're controlling the lane vision with the pink ward. This is amazing. The thing with Clearlove though is he was so like Messiah on World Elite is known as a Twisted Fate player, right? He always controlled the map movements. He was the one who instigated like, those games.
Boots of Mobility Scion player. Still controlling the map, though.
Yeah, exactly. He was the one who instigated the ganks and like helped the other lanes. And Clearlove was the farm carry jungler, and he would just sit in jungle and farm. So when he joined EDG and he needed to play a more proactive role in controlling the map, it was pretty obvious that he had a long way to go. And now, like, when EDG wins games in LPL pretty decisively, he gets the MVP because it's clear that he developed so much.
It's very interesting, though, that he puts such an emphasis on Jarvan right now. Like, that's one of the weirder things. Because if you look at China, for the most part, the picks look relatively Korean in nature these days, except for all this Jarvan.
Yeah. The Jarvan...
When Elise and Evelyn are up, it's just really baffling why they would just repeatedly pick Jarvan.
I think Jarvan...
Especially EDG.
...is an interesting pick for China right now, and I think it's partly because their top lane has evolved into like this very supportive style where we still see like the Soraka and the Lulu and that kind of thing. And keep in mind that they're on 4.9 now and they're still playing Soraka, but whatever. The Lulu, I think, synergizes interestingly with Jarvan, where you have the ultimate, and then you can use the wild growth, and it just like kind of, and then they have Yasuo mid, and it's just like this huge cluster of whatever. So I think that that's an interesting like reason to play Jarvan. Also, I feel like a lot of times people will, and then you said like if the other champions are up, then you don't get that. But I do feel like Jarvan is in an interesting place, and it's not that like LPL is the only place we see him played, right? So it's
rare. Jarvan is in other regions. Jarvan is like a backup pick when junglers are banned, though.
Yeah, so he has played. I think when Alan or Drug plays him, it's because he gets a lot of targeted bans because people think that he's rusty in the jungle and his champion pool isn't that great anymore, and to an extent that's true. So we've seen Drug play him, and we've seen he's been played, I think, 2 more times besides Clearlove and Drug, so it's not like super, it's still like fairly niche. But yeah, Clearlove was interesting. I think, again, I would have to check the picks and bans, but I think it was probably a compositional choice for Edward Gaming because they have been running those like really huge knock-up AoE type compositions, and because like China will run that bread and will always have like that kind of teamfight mentality, Jarvan I think will always have a place to an extent unless he just gets completely nerfed into uselessness. Like he was even played last split by Starhorn Royal Club's jungler, and he was like banned consistently against him because he was like actually good at using like those ultimates to set up those types of fights. So yeah,
So when we talk about the junglers in the Chinese region, okay, Clearlove obviously always had a pedigree anyway, because at one time he was in the best team in the world when World Elite was on top. But the only other time I've ever really heard anyone hype a Chinese jungler was when Alan, LoveLin, now he's called Drog. I love those name changes, by the way, like, because he's gone from LoveLin to Drog. It's like he must be a Roxy Music fan, right, Monty? It's like love is the drug. Like that's what he's all about, right?
So
anyway,
actually,
yeah.
I actually know like some interesting things about his name. So like his name is Lin Ye, right? I'm probably butchering this. But so his in-game, his client name, so like Chinese players have like client names and they have nicknames and then they have tournament realm names. But his client name is Lingyeo, like playing off of his name. Right. And Lingyeo means like drug or medicine. But his first name was LoveLin because his girlfriend's name was Lin, and then he broke up with her and he became Alan in the tournament realm. But Alan was also the name of World Elite Academy's substitute player, so there was like confusion there, so he just went back to drug.
See, the problem is that story is awesome. Like in a movie, that would be the sickest story ever. Like he's really good. He's called like LoveLin, and then Lin breaks up with him. So then he's like, you know, now he's like, listen, the only way I can get
goes
her
to the
back,
drugs.
yeah, the only way I can get her back is I have to like change my name and become a new player and change his position even as well. Then I have to get to the top, and when I win like the All-Star tournament, then I can announce like, Lin, it's me. I am Alan, this unknown support player. I want you back, baby. And that's why after those games, when he lost, he was just looking in like through the screen, like he was just like, "Oh, my lost love is all gone. Now I will turn to drugs. That's all that's left." So anyway, the question I want to ask about LoveLin was, I remember when he was a support player and Monty was telling me like this guy is maybe like on Mad Life level, everyone's saying he's like amazing, a support player. Then he changed to jungle, and obviously people don't just change positions if they're amazing at one in league and become amazing at another. But then he looked really good at the World Championships, and so you'd think, okay, so the way forwards is keep him as a jungler. Why did he go back to support? And if you go back to support, why put the Pomelo guy jungle? Like why are they not allowed to have one but not the other? Why does it have to be both?
So this was a big question for me, and I was able to like interview them and ask it, and their response was they felt that Pomelo's champion pool was better for the jungle.
Okay, so he's too bad at support. Okay, just translated for you there.
Was better for the support. The way I read that is that Alan can play like a lot of stuff, and Pomelo was a little bit more limited, but he could play like some of the carry junglers that were becoming popular. And also like the way that the Chinese meta was or the way that OMG played in the summer was that the jungler, they relied very much on Alan to like do initiations as the jungler, and with the meta shifting over to more carry players and in the jungle and more like initiators like Annie and Leona and stuff in the support role, they felt that Alan was better as an initiator. The other thing is Michael Drexen Layler, who works for Gosu Gamers, was also able to interview them and ask them like what their preferred roles were, and both Pomelo and Alan prefer to play jungle. So I like in my head I see this as, oh, okay, you get it in the summer and I get it in the spring, and that was the trade-off. But I think it was just trying to find that balance there in a new patch. Also, they decided to focus more on Son, I think because of the uncertainty of having a new mid laner, and also because according to their coach, who was Sicca at the time, like they felt that Season 4, and this was like really bizarre to me, that Season 4 kind of buffed AD carries, so not talking about like these item changes, but because they felt that having more gold for support and jungle made it so that these roles could better help the AD carries, not just like kill them. So that was an interesting take. It kind of worked out for them at the beginning because they couldn't figure out how to play with Xiyang, and San just like showed that he's definitely the knife in the back for OMG, and he can just like come out and stab you if the game goes for like 50 minutes, but it has to get there. So
one of those questions, like what I led from there, the idea that, okay, obviously, no matter which of the positions you put LoveLin, Alan, Drog, this guy at, he finds a way to be really good and be effective. But the weird thing is, no matter which of the positions they put the Pomelo guy at, people end up hating his guts and saying he's crap and he should be cut. So what I don't understand is, everyone always used to theory craft and go, well, they've got Sicca there. He's a coach. He used to be like within the bot lane with Name when they were the best bot lane. Why doesn't he just come in the team? And at the time, the excuse was, oh, well, he's a coach. He doesn't want to play. But now, isn't he in fact a player in like the second division in Positive Energy X team now? So why not just put him into the OMG lineup, do you think?
So there are a couple of theories on this. One of them talks about how Xiyang kind of wanted to play for Positive Energy again, and he was told that his team needs him, and he was almost like kind of guilted into it. And they did want to make Positive Energy, like I feel like they lost a lot of pride when Positive Energy went from winning this 2013 or summer playoffs and then to like becoming last place in LPL, only winning like 4 games the entire season. And they wanted to rebuild that team, and they felt that. So the first thing OMG did was they signed a bunch of support players. They signed like Cloud, they signed another guy called Rhythm, then they re-signed Dada, who was
interesting
Coma.
French player from the 1920s who brought in African elements to the LPL. No, really? Okay, what were you saying?
He was Coma, like he played a couple of games at Worlds, and he went to Positive Energy before. Yeah, and then and my impression was that they were going to try a bunch of them out. But they felt like they had a good talent pool of supports that they didn't need Sicca. Also, Sicca, having not played for a split, was really rusty, and then everyone who watches him play on his stream tells me that like no, Sicca would not be good for OMG. But I also feel like OMG didn't necessarily want to use Sicca, but they didn't want him to maybe like. His contract was going to be expired, and they didn't want him to maybe go coach for EDG or something because he wanted to hang out with Name or something. But that was my understanding. There are a bunch of rumors and stuff around that, but that's what I gather from the situation.
So we need to have a discussion about the cool Xiyang part. And so to do this, I want to ask Monty first. When OMG was at Worlds, and they were doing quite well in the group stage, they even took a win off SK Telecom, the hype was, okay, maybe Cool is one of the people who can stand up to Faker. Like his Ari was very good. Like maybe he could actually be a legitimate challenge. Was good. Okay, so what was Cool at that time? Like a legitimate elite level mid? Do you think?
I'm just trying to think about his performance. It's been a while since I saw those games, obviously. So. I mean, he certainly was holding his own against Faker, and in that very famous game, the second game from the group stages, he was winning lane against Faker pretty convincingly before they did that crazy tower juggle and at 13 minutes. So it seemed like he was in a good position at that time, and we also saw that he seems to be just a solid player all around because of his jungle performances that we saw at All Stars as well were quite impressive, and mechanically he's quite good. So we'll have to see. Given more time, he was out for a while, so I don't think he's probably at full strength again yet. But I think in theory he's a very good player.
So before I go into should they have replaced him, now give me your take from what you saw of Xiyang, because you remember there was hype around him coming into the All-Stars, right? That he was going to be this amazing mid laner, the MVP of the league. It sounded to me on our past discussions like you kind of thought he got exposed, and he was
really overhyped and had a very small viable champion pool, I think was a lot of the problem. And he seemed like kind of uncomfortable against playing against some of the kind of weirder or non-Chinese picks in the mid lane. But yeah, I mean, without Syndra, and then the most embarrassing thing was Faker styling on him with Syndra later on, reversing the matchup and still just crushing him. So I mean I think that was very very telling. But we didn't see Faker styling on Cool like that ever. So
what do you think, Kelsey? The comparison of the two.
So yeah, and I think my thing with Xiyang is I didn't really buy into the hype until people pointed out, oh well, he's MVP at the league, he's really good, and then I started watching his games and I was like, oh, he's really good 1v1, and I kind of bought into it a little bit. But then I don't know how familiar you guys are with International Esports Tournament, that took place just before All Stars.
Okay.
And I was kind of wondering if SK Telecom watched those games, but EDG met OMG in the finals, and they did like the same thing where they banned out all the mid laners, and then Clear Love just camped mid, and they got kind of decimated by that. Which, like, obviously it's not that hard to figure out. So they didn't have to watch those games to do that. But it was interesting to me, and I feel like...
Well, to be fair, also, that's like SK Telecom strategy, also, in generally speaking. Bengi sits on the mid lane.
For sure.
So.
Yeah. Definitely. But... so they were kind of exposed in that regard. I remember thinking in the first sets where I watched him play that his Nidalee, because he played Nidalee and Syndra. His Nidalee was like really shaky, but his Syndra was really interesting because he would go like into the enemy jungler and just kill the jungler. So just remove all of the map pressure that way after he like tower dove Jojo at level 2 and killed him. So it was like night and day, and I feel like there are a lot of players in LPL like that, actually. Like LGD, some of LGD's players, but I don't know. Like, I had mixed feelings about him at the beginning of the split, and a lot of Chinese players did, or a lot of Chinese fans did, knowing that he was just a solo queue player. I don't want to undermine his accomplishments in that regard, because I think for being just a solo queue player, he did an amazing job for the team. Like, that doesn't happen. Like, you don't just that often in that many leagues. But I do think, yeah, I agree, he was overhyped. I think he was exposed before All-Stars, at All-Stars, and then again at the LPL playoffs when IG took them out using like the same strategy. So
yeah. Kelsey actually wrote about this exact topic. Like, she set up this context of the two players' history, and then kind of addressed like, should they have replaced him? Like, what's the impact been? And so I'll kind of let her follow up on Monty here. And the article, by the way, is called "What Happened to Xiyang." It's on the NA LoL Esports. And so what I want to ask Monty is, based on what you knew of Cool before and what you saw of Xiyang now, obviously the real dilemma here is like actually an age-old dilemma in sports itself. It's like, do you bet on the old star who maybe could bring it back and he could become good again? Or do you bet on the young star who still has to learn something? Like, which is the one you go with? Like, if it had been up to you and you were the coach...
I would go with Cool. 100%.
You just prefer the established? You think you can get it back again?
Well, no, it's not established versus young. You have to just balance what the players have shown you, and I think that Cool has shown a depth of game knowledge across positions that is rare, and therefore he is a more valuable player.
Okay, so I think from the article, unless I was mistaken, that Kelsey actually is different to Loco Doco because she actually knows that when she's young, you go with the other one. That was a bad pun. Just go. What did you think? Should he have replaced Cool?
Yeah. Sorry, it took me a couple seconds. Yeah, I think Cool. They should have kept Cool. I do think it was less clear cut than what you were saying, because if you just watched All Stars, first of all, I don't think his play as jungle Lee Sin for Team Ice, it was Team Ice, right? Is indicative at all of his ability to play mid lane for an LPL team. But if you just watch that, you might think, oh, wow, Cool is like really good. They should clearly replace him. But he actually played at the end of the last LPL split for OMG against Invictus Gaming, like the last split where Invictus Gaming won a game and managed to like sneak into the playoffs where they eventually unseated OMG. And he was really he didn't do so well. He did not look good. He looked worse than Xiyang in those games. So I think that's where some of OMG's indecision came from, and where Messiah kind of like helped him out a little bit in some of the interviews and said, and put on display that Cool was thinking about an LSPL team to like maybe put a little bit more pressure on OMG to make the decision. But yeah, I think ultimately it was a good decision, especially since the difference between like Cool's mechanics between that game and when he was at All Stars, I say that I don't think his Lee Sin play was like a good indication, but he did display like some mechanical skill in those games that was absent. So yeah, I think it was a good decision to keep Cool ultimately, and I think he's done amazing things already, even not being up to his form, that Xiyang would not be capable of in this new split.
So here's the thing. Coming into All-Stars, everyone who watched the Chinese scene, OMG was their hope, okay? This is the best team in the league. They've been dominating the season. They've got the MVP. This is our hope, okay? This is the team that we're all behind. Kind of like in Europe, okay? Since Fnatic had reclaimed the crown, everyone was like, no, I always knew Fnatic were the best. What were you saying about Alliance? No, Fnatic have always been the best. They always win the split, you know, is that storyline? But then I noticed the same things happened in both regions. Fnatic kind of shit the bed at All-Stars. OMG got exposed by SK Telecom and picked apart. So then this season, okay, in Europe, Alliance is doing really well, and then EDG wins the LPL, so everyone quickly is like, well, this boat's sinking, so there's a really nice, sweet-ass boat with, like, all customized shit. I'm going to jump on that one. Maybe that's going somewhere. And now everyone wants to tell you, no, Alliance is easily the best Western team. So people are going to tell me EDG is for sure the best Chinese team. They're gonna be really dominant. Is EDG going to be different to OMG if they go to a big tournament now? Kelsey?
No, I actually think OMG is the better team right now.
I think also OMG has better style for international play. Yeah. I think EDG's like weighted out style is going to be brutally destroyed by Korean teams, whereas OMG packs a bit more punch in the early game.
Yeah, and for sure I think EDG is like fixing a lot of those problems, but they haven't established the track record of having fixed those problems. Like, they had a 26-minute game against Invictus Gaming in the playoffs when before they hadn't had a game against them that was less than 40 minutes. So, like, that's a small indication of progress, but it's not an established track record of having shorter games. So,
what do you think?
I think OMG is better.
Do you think EDG could they be amazing in the international scene, Monty?
No, I don't think they would be. I think that they just lack the tempo. So, I think it's that would actually be, I think, one of the worst teams to represent China at the given time. Now, there's a lot of time left before Worlds, obviously, to fix these problems. But if we were to say that if Worlds is hosted today, I think EDG would not do very well.
So I remember these. Oh yeah, go on.
Sorry, I just wanted to say that, like, EDG, I think, is taking interesting steps that differ to like what the other teams are doing by importing Korean players, which is they want to go to Korea and like boot camp there. They want to learn from the Korean teams. They aren't necessarily like trying to import Koreans themselves. So I think that will help them a lot. I think that they could be a very different team by the time Worlds rolls around. I still don't think a Chinese team is going to beat a Korean team yet, but I think it could happen in tournaments to come.
In the LCS EU playoffs for the spring season, we saw from Alliance, okay, when they started to have problems in the playoffs, they just sort of went back into the CLG EU playbook and they were like, you know what, let's just pick the late scaling champions, stall the game as far as we can, and then win there, okay? Because then we can beat the opponents in the team fights, okay? And it seemed like, in general, it worked. Like, they could stall the game if they wanted, and it was very hard to end the game in that meta. What do you think now, Monty? If a team really is determined to stall out, can they do it? Or could you, if you're the team otherwise who's really good at objectives, will you just pick them apart? What do you think?
I think if you ban certain champions that are key to stalling out games, then you can avoid that situation pretty easily, because most players have like a certain field, a certain pool of mostly meta picks, and even if they have something that's a little wacky, a meta pick like Ziggs is very good at stalling out the game. If you can get Anivia through lane, Anivia is really good at stalling out the game. So if you can ban out a few of the meta picks that are good at stalling, and then also like a pocket ban or two, then I think you can do it.
What do you think, Kelsey? I don't think you entirely buy into what Monty says. I think you think like EDG have more of a chance than he says. Like they could make the style work, right?
Well, like I think that you can make styles work in different situations, and but I don't think that EDG is even good enough at that style, because like it's worth pointing out that I mentioned Positive Energy only won 4 games, but one of the games that they won was actually against EDG. So you have to think that like they were able to execute like this team that was very, very clearly the worst team in China. Like they had pretty bad and inconsistent players. Like, they were able to put it together enough to get an early game snowball hard enough, and eventually EDG did like come back. Actually, they came back from like a 10,000 gold lead and were even, but they lost in a base race, so it was really whatever. So you have to think that if they can do it and like almost destroy a team like that, then they're not. I feel like you can perfect a stalling out style if, like you said, you have some like weird picks that won't get banned out, that are good at wave clear, things like that, or really good Baron control. Like you can build like a 3 Borg team composition or whatever. Then I think it's possible, but I don't think even EDG can execute it well enough right now, and I don't think that they're attempting to. From what I've seen of their recent games, I don't think that that's a direction they want to go in terms of perfecting that style. They want to showcase more of Yu's talent, more of Yu's champion pool, and I think that's like a really good move. And I think that will make them better than perfecting that style. So
there's a storyline I've heard from China over the last 6 months, and it would make a really cool like movie. It's that, okay, we've been talking now about OMG, EDG, and everyone's thinking, yeah, the best teams. This makes sense that you're talking about them. No. What people don't know is there's a conspiracy in China. And that, actually, these best teams, they just look like they're the best teams. They're like, they're the salesmen out front selling the Chinese league, but secretly, shh, don't tell anyone. In the second league of China, all the best teams are there. All the best players, these amazing up-and-coming players. These guys would destroy, and if they got into the LPL, oh my god, World Elite Academy would take a shit on everyone's face. And you know what? It's almost like the hipster thing. It's like, it's like if you get into China, you're like, wow, I love watching EDG, and they're like, oh, you watch LPL? I watch LPSL myself. Like, that's the real league, the ones that us who know about this shit, that's where we watch the league. Oh, you watch that? Yeah, well, you enjoy your OMG and all that, but I'm going to go watch the real league. Kelsey, this isn't real, right?
No. I could troll you and say, World Elite. I do think World Elite Academy was a better team, like a few months ago when they had Ari, because I felt like that guy was like really good and really smart. But there was this issue with like him and his girlfriend distracting all of the players, and oh no, he can't be on the team anymore. So now he casts LSPL into Massive.
Well, where does this come from then? Is there like is there a grain of truth behind it?
So I think where it comes from is there was a tournament called G League. If you guys aren't familiar with like the G League, which is really huge in China and like all esports pretty much, where World Elite Academy won the tournament. And to do that, they actually beat World Elite. So the rumor started out that World Elite Academy was better than World Elite. And, okay, let's take into account that at the time, World Elite was, like, pretty much imploding. Like, they had Messiah about to retire. They had Clear Love and FCZF, like, pretty much at the throats of Wei Xiao and Sao Mei. And then, like, they were defeated by World Elite Academy, and then World Elite Academy went to the finals, and then OMG wasn't even in that tournament because they got beaten by a team called CC Club, and I think this added to the rumor because CC Club was an amateur team that just, like, came out of nowhere and, like, beat OMG. And I don't even know what happened in those games. I wasn't able to find the VODs and watch them. So they didn't even make it to the qualifiers, but I think this was, like, one of their players is a huge Riven guy, and he even still gets Riven bans in games because he plays for an amateur team that's pretty much all of them minus their jungler. And I think this was like when Riven was really strong and he was like a really good Riven player and he could just like somehow solo OMG with Riven. Like, that's my understanding of what happened. But so that, I think, was what created the first conception. Then from there, like, the rumor just snowballed out of control that, oh, the only team that could actually beat them in LPL is OMG, maybe on a good day. And then, like, they're much better than World Elite. And one of my favorite interviews on the subject was Mykles Drexen, like, as I mentioned, was able to interview, like, Sukim and Sao Mei. And Sukim's response was, having, like, a talented sister team makes us really better. The PC argument, and Sao Mei was like, we'll try not to get overtaken, just kind of laughing at the idea. But it was But that's where the rumors started. And I do think that part of it is like the idea of the domination of the league, because they went 28-2, right? In LSPL. So that tends to make, like, we saw the Coast phenomenon, right? When Coast during the off season was playing in NACL and they were just like beating everyone. It's like, oh, Coast is going to be actually really good this time, you know? Coast is going to make it. And like, it happens in every single league, but it's just that for some reason in China there's this rumor that the LSPL teams are like really good. And I do think that some of the LSPL teams are advancing right now, because you can watch some of their games and they actually are implementing some strategical play. Like, they started playing TF well, like better than in LPL a little bit, but I still think that they'll lose out if they don't win lane phase. And that's like a huge problem with World Elite Academy, is if they don't crush lane phase, they have no idea what to do. Or if they do crush lane phase and the game doesn't end, they don't know what to do. So,
do you have something to say there, Monty?
Well, just to put some more context into this conversation, because I found this all very interesting as it was happening, because I don't watch these leagues. Mm-hmm. So I mean, I don't watch the underleague for China at all. So my introduction to this kind of this World Elite Academy in the last season of the LPL was there were a few people on Reddit. There were like a few people on Reddit who are like really hardcore Chinese scene fans. And it was like in every single, like, anytime you mentioned China, for some reason, one or two of these people would come in and they would just be like, nobody knows what you're talking about. World Elite Academy is God tier. Like, as soon as they get into LPL, they're just going to destroy everybody. Just like crazy crap that I was seeing from them. And it piqued my interest, because I was like, oh, I wonder how good this team actually is. You know, I don't know. I'm not going to watch them until they get into the LPL. I don't care. So now that they're there, to put some context to those people who don't know what the standings in the LPL are right now.
You look so gleeful.
World Elite Academy is 0-8. They have not won a game yet. So they are currently tied for last place in the standings, which, you know, I'm not happy about it. It would have been really cool if this was like a Cloud9 phenomenon where this team like came together and then came and dominated LPL. It would have been exciting. But I do find it odd that they receive so much hype. And conveniently, of course, all of these people have now disappeared back into the pit from which they were spawned. You know, but nobody's out there saying that World Elite Academy is like the god team of China anymore. It was an interesting phenomenon, and I think that some of these comments, these comments were particularly interesting because of how aggressive they were towards other people, saying that you don't know anything, it's World Elite Academy, and just like oddly aggressive at the same time. So intriguing, but ultimately, unfortunately, there was very little truth there that we've seen so far.
With all that said, though, it does seem like China, actually even more so than Korea, has been able to like completely replace a whole bunch of its stars and bigger names with like brand new talent. Not even people who'd been in teams before, or if they'd been in a team, it was like just a rank amateur team. The famous example is this Rising Stars team, where like every player pretty much went to another LPL team and they became better and they became good at their positions. What I want to ask you is this. This isn't to like spin controversy, but if I watch, okay, yesterday I made the grave mistake of going to the stadium at Yongsan and watching IM1 play IM2, during which time my only thought was like, I think at this point I'd even rather watch IM3, aka MKZ play. Like, this is just fucking appalling right now. Like, and these are teams in OGN, right? These are OGN level teams, top 16 teams in Korea. Meanwhile, there's these teams where admittedly they're not amazing, but they're making waves when they're in the second division of LPL, which already itself has something like 12 teams, does it? Or was it? No, 8 was it? It was 8 and it expanded to 12?
LSPL or?
LPL?
LPL is 8 teams.
Okay.
It's 8 teams, yeah. They're going to expand to 12 next season, but yeah.
So, is it naive to say that in terms of talent, China has as deep a pool as Korea? Does it have even more because it's got more people? What do you think, Kelsey?
I don't know if it has more players, but it has, like, if you think about in terms of, China has like 20 servers, right? And they have, so that's like 10, sorry, I can suddenly do not math. It's like 1,000 challenger teams and challenger players, and like all of the best ones all amass and like concentrate at the Ionian server. So you have to think that there's like this really rich group of people, and just by the sheer amount of population that China has and the sheer amount of fans who watch LPL, there's like, you have to think about numbers and ratios in terms of that. That doesn't always hold true, but in terms of mechanical skill, I think that there's definitely a huge pool. I don't think that any of the players are, I don't think that LSPL's problem is that their players are like truly horrible, but then you see, like I said, Starhorn Royal Club's players from last split were, I don't know where they found them, honestly. But for example, Cola is the new top laner for Starhorn Royal Club. He was on the 15th place LSPL team, so 15 out of 16. And he's not like super strong, right, in terms of top lane talent, but he's not awful either. He's not 15th place North American challenger team, right? So,
well, yeah, like you're saying, just in terms of the player base, because I think that that's something that's very hidden away from a lot of people who think about League of Legends, is that the Chinese scene dwarfs every other scene on the planet. So it's clearly an issue with their infrastructure, why they're not able to get these top tier players, because just in terms of volume, they have so many to pick from.
So, okay, even if the players coming from Korea haven't necessarily been the best picks, or they haven't been the premium talent, and even if they have these problems at the moment in their scene, isn't the solution, Monty, that we always present to teams that have problems is get a coach, get an analyst? So not only that, they're trying to get Korean coaches. And listen, this might sound naive, but I bet one day some Chinese billionaire owner guy makes an offer to some really good Korean coach and says, listen, come work for me, I'll pay you like 4 times more, and like, you know, this is like my son's team, I just want it to be successful. So eventually they'll get a really good coach as well. Will this turn it around, do you think, Monty?
I think it's part of what will turn it around, but I think it will be. I think that when the Korean coaches start coming, they're gonna start enforcing certain infrastructural changes in the Chinese scene. Just because from talking to Tabe about, I mean, and also talking to Chaos, who was visiting all of the Chinese houses a couple of years ago, and then he came and stayed with me in Korea afterwards. I mean, you were there, Duncan. You remember these conversations that we had, but it seemed like. From all the descriptions I've heard, it's pretty like Wild West. Like the teams don't really have their shit together in terms of their routines and structure and training regimens. And that's a little odd, considering especially the amount of money that flies around in China, supposedly. And like you said, there are these like random billionaires or multimillionaires who just back these teams. So the cash is there. So as soon as I think some of these Korean coaches start coming over and changing the way that these teams live and practice, maybe that will ripple out to a lot of other teams from there.
And that's definitely the case. I think, so first of all, LACE or L.Ace is like the player team organization that everyone belongs to, and that Tabe has spoken somewhat harshly about in the past, is actually subsidizing foreign coaches who want to come, and it's not like super specific in terms of what a foreign coach is. So MonteCristo could go coach in China and get money.
I don't want to live in China.
So there is like money being put behind, okay, we want to see what these coaches can do and to help our scene and give strategy. And I think, yeah, from like reading Ryan Lewis' interview about Starhorn Royal Club, and when he visited the house, and the terms of like, they very much talk about how what we're learning from the Korean players is their attitude toward the game, like the infrastructure that they have is something that's helpful. And like the billionaires who, my understanding is that the billionaires who do have teams, they're just like kind of friends. They hang out with so this is like not a super high level structure. They just like, they're buddies with the players. And that's also why they inspire like a lot of loyalty in terms of like for example, Royal Club's guy who went AWOL for a while, like they covered it up for him because he was their friend, right? So it's kind of how the situation, it's not super formal, but it's getting better. Like they're bigger they're more better player salaries now. They're getting like all this stuff, and the players would practice a lot. And like OMG is considered like a draconian organization because they're always like playing really hard. And there are some things that I think are like the organization is kind of harsh on. But they're also just in terms of like the ethic that the organization and the structure that they provide is like ahead in other ways as well. So like their organization can be kind of questionable at times, but also it produces results, and some of its methods, not like international results yet, but that's like one of the reasons OMG is so good.
So I have one topic left to discuss that we briefly touched on before, but for some reason we always forget it. Because in all the other regions in the world, the patches, it's close enough, okay. Maybe if Champions is halfway through, maybe they wait around or a playoff round before they switch to the next patch. Sometimes that happens. But in general, the patches are pretty similar, and that's why you see the picks go across the other 3 regions. But we always have to be reminded, I've noticed, every international tournament, oh, by the way, China hasn't got this patch, or they're going to get this patch in 2 weeks or something. That must play a role, right, Monty? If you're 2 patches behind.
Yeah, of course it does. Yeah, of course. I mean, and it hasn't. I think All Stars was like a particularly egregious like patch behind scenario, and that it kind of waxes and wanes as to how many patches behind they are. It's usually at least 1, but sometimes it's more, right? But it's usually 1. And yeah, of course, that affects the way the teams prepare. Certainly, it allows them to adapt to the new patch faster because there's a ton of evidence from the other regions if they watch them as to like what is going to be functional in a new patch, especially with sweeping changes. So I think they can pick up the new patch faster as a result, and they don't have to do as much trial and error because there will already be just a wealth of film about that patch already present. Now, I don't know why it's so damn hard for Tencent to patch their game into the most recent patch, but there you go. You know, it's not Riot's fault. Tencent operates League of Legends in China, so it's entirely on Tencent that this is happening.
Is there a good reason why they don't, Kelsey?
I don't really know. I don't.
Do the
not
Chinese
that I know
fans
of.
have
I'm
a
sure
theory or
there's like
anything?
something. I don't know any theories on why it's the case, but I think that the one theory that I've heard is that they didn't want season 4 for some reason. Like they were almost like resisting the season 4 changes, and they didn't want them to come about, which doesn't make any logical sense. And I would think that like if a company is really smart, like and really big and really powerful, like Tencent, then they wouldn't like resist something that they can't really fight because like the rest of the world is getting season 4.
So they were sort of like League of Legends aimish. They were just like, technology stops here. We're happy with this. We're just gonna live our lives out, make our corn.
League of Luddites.
Yeah.
But I mean, I can't think of like a good reason because they, in particular, the new season changes, like the preseason changes, they resisted for like months. It was months before they got those. And then they kind of sped it up really quickly and like skipped some patches to get caught up. And then towards the end of last spring, they were only a week behind the rest of the world, like just 1 week. Like if you didn't see it, it would be the next week. I think that they still currently are just a week behind. We'll know for sure, obviously. I've heard people like argue with me on this subject. But we'll know for sure this weekend, obviously, if they're playing on 4.10 or not.
So now we've done China, which is like one of the main reasons we had Kelsey on here. Let's do like some Korea, and then we'll do the LCS stuff afterwards, because the LCS stuff, unfortunately, because it's Super Week right now, and this might not come out for a day or something, is the part that'll decay the fastest. So that's going to be the end. If we talk about Korea now, the first thing I have to say to you, Monty, is I used to like this team called SK Telecom, pretty good, and I have this perverse pleasure that I take, right, where sometimes even if I didn't pull for a team or support them when they were the best, I love it when like the great player in sports is like 1 year past his peak, okay, and he kind of knows like I'm not really at the peak of my powers, but he knows like, listen, I've still got like 90% of what I was, and if I can pull that 90% out in the right moment, like I think I can still win, like I think I can still beat these new guys who are on top. And so every time in the playoffs you see him and he goes to the game 7 and you hope he's going to win and he just falls short, and oh, you know, next year is probably not going to be as good, but you're hoping again, maybe he can do it, maybe he has a great game, and you think, oh, he's back, he's going to do it again. Well, it turns out that SK Telecom is like in a grave right now. And Samsung Blue has just stood over it like, we will never let you out of this grave. We are the gods now. We will beat you down as you try to fight out of this grave. Like, what's going on, Monty? They can just never beat Blue now, right? It's over.
I don't know. Is it one of those situations where, Blue is now the SK Telecom to the Bullets? Like, is it that kind of situation that exists? I'm not sure. I mean, those games that they played were really good games. And I think that there's a strong case that you can make right now. And indeed, like, I personally believe that those are the top 2 teams in the world at the moment. Just because we have so much inconsistency with Samsung White that I don't really think we can... Yeah, they're not looking good. And Shield had a very lackluster group stage, as we saw last night. They really just seemed quite confused by their own style of play. So... I don't know if we're going to say that SK Telecom can never come back from this situation, but it is something that we could and did say. That is what happened with the KT Bullets and their relationship with SK Telecom. It's like it was like their nemesis. Just like with Blaze, Blaze has never been able to like beat the KT Bullets.
Yeah.
You have certain strategic relationships that end up as being quite odd in Korea, but stylistically, it just didn't work. And I think that. A major factor in Blue's kind of resurgence is how good Spirit got. Because it's actually crazy how fast this guy got really good. And went from being a substitute player to one of the best junglers in the world very quickly. Just mechanically, in terms of his decision-making, in terms of his teamfight presence. I mean, he's incredible to watch. And also deft, really, rising to the occasion as well. So
okay, you kind of set it up. That's like an ideal analogy is SKT and Bullets, because what used to happen was, I've always said to people that the Bullets' performance in that summer season where they lost was one of those retarded scenarios where their performance in a losing season might have been better than some of the seasons where someone won and it was easier, Like they did almost everything you could do to win, and then they were just beaten by what turned out to be the best team ever. Now in this sort of scenario, every time we've now seen these Samsung teams play against SKT, it's the same story, right? What happens is they get behind in the early game, and then they play amazingly in the mid game. They're doing all these things where you're like, oh, if they can just get this pick, oh, they were just off. If they can just get this fight, oh, just lost one man too many. And it's not like they're almost playing perfectly in the mid game, but like somehow the other team plays perfect, and so you both just continue. Like, I'm slightly ahead of you, and then at the end I just win. Like, does it not look it looks impossible in the matchup at least, right?
Well, the thing about Samsung Blue is that they are by far the best team in the world when it comes to lane swapping and understanding how to play that situation as a team in order to basically just scrape all these little itty bitty advantages together that turns into an overwhelming advantage for Acorn typically. So that's why almost everybody falls behind them early, and even though I would say Samsung Blue, they do have a certain amount of weakness in the mid game where they don't group quite as fast as a team like SK Telecom K. It's just in the current meta that is a little bit better. And it is going to be intriguing what happens, especially in patch 4.11, with the changes to the XP ranges and the turrets and everything like that, because that's going to make lane swapping not as difficult as it is now, I assume. Obviously not having seen this patch in competitive play, but that's my read on it, because the top laners will be a lot safer, both from dives and from getting zoned out of experience. So if that situation occurs, and we're already seeing more of a transition back into standard 2v2 and 1v1 lanes because of the buffs to the Dragon Gold. So if this is like the direction that Riot is pushing it, which personally I don't really like, but, Riot hates lane swaps, so there's that.
They've done a great job of changing the meta so they don't get them, though, right?
They keep trying. They keep trying new tricks to destroy the lane swap.
Secretly, they're really big fans of lane swaps. So what they do is they just implement the things they've done and ensure they happen all the time now, right?
I mean, I think that Riot. This is obviously a bit of a tangent, but I don't know this for sure. Riot has never said this to me, but it's my opinion that Riot does not like lane swaps because it is so far removed from what the average player experiences in League of Legends that it falls into an entirely different realm of knowledge where lane swaps are incredible if you're like an analyst and you're like, wow, this is about as strategically deep as this game can go. I mean, this is like new ground. It's so innovative. It changes the meta. The lane swap meta like shifts all the time. And 2v2 and 1v1 in comparison is rather boring, in my opinion. And I do like a good mix. That's true. And I do think that there should have been and continue. Like I like the fact they increased the Dragon Gold and they make this kind of trade-off that you have going on, right? But I do think that maybe the changes right now are a little bit overkill, maybe in 4.11. I am worried about that patch because I like 4.10 just fine. But so yeah. Anyway, I think that they just want, when you watch League of Legends, for it to be mostly the same as what happens in your solo queue games, because otherwise the average viewer just gets confused and angry. And it's true, they do, because a lot of people do get mad about lane swaps, and perhaps that's the best thing for the average viewer, but me, as somebody who loves the deeper strategy of the game, I find the lane swapping highly interesting. So anyway, that was the tangent, but to go back, in the situation where blue loses that power, perhaps blue starts to fall off a little bit, because that is indeed what they are very good at.
Kelsey, did you watch this series? What do you think of this matchup?
Yeah, so it was pretty definitive. It was pretty in favor. Like, I mean, SK Telecom did just fall behind in like little places, but in the way that blue won, it looked definitive. Even so, I do think that one point that's valuable is just we talk about like as the patches keep changing. I also think blue is very good at adapting, and I think that in terms of, even if I think they'll adapt well even without the understanding of lane swaps, I think that it's not clear whether or not they just are really good at lane swapping and adapting to lane swaps, or if they're just really good at adapting to new changes in general. I think maybe it could be interesting to see if like Riot kind of slows down in releasing patches generally, which they're ramping up. It seems like.
Yeah, there have been a lot of patches recently.
Really weird, and they're not just like little patches either. It's just like, oh, okay, we're going to completely change this champion, then completely change this champion again, and
that's actually
like,
a really good
turrets.
point. I hadn't considered that, but if we think about it, actually last year, 3.14, which was my favorite patch, came out after Worlds last year.
Right.
I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that was the
and
first
we're already on 4.11, and we're still 3 months out from Worlds.
Right.
So the patch cycle has increased in speed.
Yeah.
Obviously, that doesn't mean there were more or less changes because how large those patches are, but there have been many significant alterations this season.
Right, and
yeah,
I think that has helped blue a little bit too. Rise to Power, just like their understanding of how to adapt to changes.
But my concern is that if they're in a situation where they are in a very standard game, that especially Acorn, who has been fantastic in this lane swap meta, I mean, how is he going to hold up against like a lane monster like Flame, right? That does like start to wonder about that, I think. But
So
here comes the question. Do you have a point?
Oh, I just wanted to say that like I remember just watching Acorn, like the way he can manage dives and also like getting dived upon and that sort of thing. I think on Rumble, like when we had the qualifiers for the World Cyber Games, was like when I first noticed that like he was really good at handling multiple opponents. And I think, yeah, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see him more in 1v1s though.
Here's the $1 million question. Which team in OGN right now has the best chance to beat blue? You know the answer, Monty. You know the answer. Who do you think it is? What do you think? You're along the right lines there, I think. You had an interesting train of thought you were developing. Where were you going with that?
It's not Blaze, Thorin.
Obviously it isn't, but yeah, who do you think it is?
I don't know. It's so hard right now because they do look so strong. But then again, I mean, that's the pattern in Korea is like you could say this, but out of 7 seasons of champions, we've had 6 different winners. There was very odd to have a repeat champion in SK Telecom T1K. And also Korea has a history in champions of like when we only had 12 teams in 2 groups, like the 3rd place team like Sword or Ozone, like showing up big in the playoffs. And you never know when a team is going to really like light on fire. I'm very intrigued by the new sword, but I think that they had a surprisingly weak group. I mean, who could have predicted that Shield would have just like face planted? So I feel like they haven't really truly been tested in a legitimate way yet. And then you know what I'm going to say? The KT Arrows, man, because that is
keep on believing, Monty. Keep believing.
Hey man, next week or on Friday we'll see how
now
the
that your
Arrows
bullets
do
has gone.
plays.
It's like you just you've done like what all those Nudging Sword fans who magically became Nudging Shield fans. You've become like an Arrows fan now because Bullets is dead.
The bullets are dead, so I switch over to the Arrows. No,
KT
I just think no, it's true. They're just the thing about the Arrows is that they are so young, all of them, and when they're good, they're so good, and they're so aggressive and dynamic that is a team. I don't think they're going to beat Blue this season at all. I don't actually think that they're going to make a deep run, but I do think that they have, out of all the teams in Champions, I think they are the most explosive. And like if a team is going to really just like suddenly click and have like a deep playoff run that nobody expects, like they're definitely the dark horse to have that kind of experience. So I'd be interested. I mean, their first couple of games, they did what the KT Arrows do, which is smash one game and then lose horribly the next, right?
I'll tell you an interesting tidbit, okay? Because this week I did some interviews with Samsung players, and those will be a while before they come out because like the apocalypse was happening on my site. Like I was gonna have to become a janitor here in Korea or something. Me and like Ggoong and all those guys were just going to be cleaning up around the place. But basically, I asked them the same question, okay, well, you know, every season of Champions, whoever was the strongest and won the season, next season, they not only never win, but no one ever repeats. They don't happen once, and that's the team we all consider like the best team to ever play this game. So I said to a player from Samsung Blue, so why are you going to win this season then? You know, what reason would I have to believe you're going to win this season? And he told me, well, we don't think about that, because all we think to ourselves is like, I think he said something along the lines of like, that Ozone beats them in practice, and so if they can beat Ozone, then they know they can beat everyone. So that's an interesting little tidbit for you there. Thoughts?
I mean, I
don't buy the hype. Ozone could do it.
Not to try to predict the Korean scene. Like I said, it's been the consistency for top teams just hasn't been there. Even for individual players, the consistency just hasn't been there. Because if we've talked about this before, but if you look at Seasons of Champions, and SK Telecom is the only team to have ever won twice, and indeed there are only 6 players to have ever won twice, and 5 of them are on SK Telecom, and the other one is dade. Like, it's not only the teams, it's the players themselves seem incapable of repeating, even though all these roster changes happen. It's that the level of competition just like surges constantly, and the scene is constantly refreshing itself here. It's not like Europe where Fnatic wins every season. It's not like NA where Cloud9 and TSM have been on top traditionally. So I think it's kind of a fool's errand. You never know I think Blue will have a good run this season. I'd be surprised if they didn't make at least the semifinals, but we'll see.
Wait. I have to stop you there, Monty. So you'd be surprised if they didn't make a good run, if they didn't at least make the semifinals, but you can't pick out a single team in the whole league who you'd favor to beat them. Then you think they'll win the league, mate.
I suppose I just don't know who's going to win until we see some more games. Like, as soon as, usually in Champions, the group stage, it's really hard to get a read on certain teams because the groups are relatively small. Yeah. And then the way that the groups are stacked out, of course, with a team that, like the top placing team, the top 4 teams, like all separated in different groups, and the way they kind of balance it out. So, a couple teams are just kind of not very good in each of the groups, generally speaking, that it's hard to get a read on the top team's actual skill. And that once we get into the quarterfinals, it's a lot easier to see how these teams actually rank up.
So thanks.
MonteCristo, Vlad playing the Falcons.
No, it's the stealth. I'm all aboard the stealth type train now.
You're on the stealths, yeah.
Hey, I was telling everybody the stealths were good when they weren't in the last season of Champions, and nobody believed me, even when they were beating Ozone and stuff. I was like, no, this team is actually pretty good.
I'm like a huge Captain Jack fan, so.
Oh, there you go.
I have to, yeah.
Okay, so you're basically the antithesis of everything I love in this world then, Kelsey. You stand for everything that I despise. Okay. Anyway, enough about that. So, here's a question I have for you. Me and you, Monty, predicted that Shield would win OGN Finals. Now they've drawn 3 series in a row to the extent that they're going to be going out of... Basically, as long as Bullets or Falcons, one of them wins that series... Shield will not be exiting this group. They'll be out in the group stage now. Thoughts on how that could happen?
Not only that, but the Falcons also have games against Sword left as well. And if the Falcons 2-0 either the Bullets
you're right,
or Sword, then they get through. And even if the Falcons draw all the rest of their games, they force a tiebreaker with Shield. So there are more ways that Shield doesn't make the quarterfinals.
There's only one way they can, basically. Yeah. So what do you think on Shield?
They have to hope that Sword, the scenario in which they make it is that Sword 2-0s the Falcons, which you got to think is probably going to happen.
But it's going 1-1 with Bullets that is the hard one, you know.
Well, I don't know. Like, the Bullets kind of have not been very good either, so maybe they'll be able to draw. It's not totally out of the realm of possibility.
Okay, but how does Shield, this wonderful Shield with Ggoong and Save, let me remind you, all you viewers, the wonderful Save, the best top laner in the world. Oh God, his Shyvana is so good.
He actually played well yesterday.
Yeah, he's a good player, yeah. So what happened to this team then? What's your theory?
Well, I was talking about this a lot on the cast last night, and I feel that Shield's weakness, for whatever reason, is that their lane swapping is actually improved, but when they get an advantage, they don't know how to snowball it in the mid game. They just do really dumb things in the mid game, and they lose whatever advantage that they gain very quickly. We saw this.
I know that infuriates you as a coach a lot. Like when teams do that, you're just like, oh, what are you doing? I thought I told you about this double lift. Sorry, I got confused there. I meant Shield, so it was Zephyr. Yeah, okay, keep going.
I'm sure Reach is feeling that way right now too. But no, against the Bullets last night, Naj and Shield had a lead. And then they just repeatedly walked, face checked brushes and got picked until Bullets managed to come back and kill them. They had poor vision control, so it's just very odd. And then the second game they actually looked very dominant, and it was a much cleaner game, but just their inconsistency with snowballing advantages, I think, has really been their undoing. Because if we go back and we look at a lot of these games, frequently Shield has a very large advantage in the early game that a team like Blue would just crush you with. But Shield just kind of loses sight of how to close out the game. And I think part of this, too, is that a different factor is that Ggoong's 2 best champions got nerfed, LeBlanc and Nidalee. So now he's playing Orianna and stuff that he just doesn't look quite as impressive on as he did on these 2 other champions. So that was a factor as well. And we've talked about Watch, but Watch is not the world's best jungler, and he never has been.
This is why whenever there's a debate about let's decide, is this guy who's doing really well now, he's like a rising star, is he the new best at his position? I always am I'll sound actually very conservative. I'm always erring towards the guy who was the best before. Any position, whether it's Faker at mid, or it's someone Flame at top, or it's Mata at the support position or whatever. Even if another player, his team's doing better. The reason I always err on the side of the great player is because the great players tend to have survived a few metas. They've been good for a year now. The big problem with, as we've seen now with Save and Ggoong, is that, okay, they're amazing until people figure out exactly which champion to ban. Or if you give them this one champion, you play them this one way, and they're not as good anymore. Suddenly, the great players, you can't completely take them out of having a great impact on the game, just with bans, right?
Sure, among other things. I would say that's one aspect.
So as you see them, as they stand right now, I want to ask both of you, where do you think Save and Ggoong stack up at their positions?
I think Ggoong has been hurt a lot harder than Save. Save has actually shown some pretty decent Kayle play. I think that Save is actually still the strongest player on his team, at least at the moment. He really did not play badly last night. So it's mostly...
He was even pretty good on Rise in that stupid series they drew with, who was it? Jin Falcons, yeah. He was even pretty decent then.
Yeah, that was the game they lost to the Falcons was pretty sad. But and the other thing too is that as part of the lane swap, usually Save, I mean, a lot of the time Save has been able to get like kills in lane. We look at that first game against the Bullets last night. I mean, they counter-ganked Watch, and Save counter-ganked Ryu in the top lane with Limit, and they double-killed them. And they got a huge advantage for Save. But then they didn't translate that into Vision at all. And then they just eventually got picked to death by Yasuo. So just really fundamental errors that are surprising. But it's quite common, actually, for Watch to like get Save fed, and then for them to not ward properly, and then have Save get like dove 2 minutes later, and then he loses his advantage. Or they'll get that double kill, and then Watch like won't put enough wards down, and then they get picked. Like it's just odd. And Gorilla has always had a problem too with face checking brushes, and that continues to happen.
So as I pass this off to Kelsey, let me just set it up like this. In terms of top laners, Kelsey is like MonteCristo is about like rotations of Chinese LoL teams. Even if the team can be really good and they have really good skills, they disgust him in the way that they play the game. They don't know what they're doing. They violate his tenets, his commandments that he has handed down to the world. And so in the same sense, when Kelsey sees someone like Flame, and he's up there shining in the top lane, being a wonderful 1v1 player in a world that doesn't exist anymore in his own mind. She's disgusted. She thinks, why aren't you putting on map pressure? Why is the jungler coming there? I mean, this is kind of accurate, right? So I'm wondering where you're going to rank Save now.
So, yeah, I actually would be a little bit harsher with Save. I think, like, he's pretty strong in terms of, like, I thought that exchange where they got the 2 kills at the top was probably like my favorite exchange of the entire game, because it was just like done really well, and then like Watch got the perfect
Watch played that really well.
Yeah, the perfect amount of damage on like the second, and I was just like, wow, that was really good. But then like those were the only 2 kills I think they got the entire game. So that was really, and then like there was this part where Save they were trying to ward off, and I think I was actually talking about this with Froskerin, and we were trying to figure out, okay, so why did Save Dragon's Descent right there, like after Limit had backed off from the tower a little bit, and then we were thinking, well, like he could have like wanted to put wards there, like they could have brought wards and tried to get some like control in the jungle, and it's like, well, maybe they thought that there would be a 2v2, but it was just like unclear as to why they were playing it that way. But I couldn't, yeah, I feel like if the player, I feel almost like he's given these leads by Watch, and their synergy is like really good, and the fact that they can't do much with them is on Save as much as it's on Watch. So I would be a little bit more critical, but I do think he's like obviously very good mechanically, and then in those early instances, I think he's very strong, and that's something that I think a lot of top laners are struggling with. Is like what to do in the early game, like jungle follow, like how do you get a lead?
But that's improved massively for them, by the way, this season, while other things have fallen off. But yeah, I appreciate what you're saying, but at the same time, whenever I watch Save, usually, and especially previously, his idea of how to pressure the map, especially when his team is behind. Like there were so many games last season where he would go off and start split pushing at precisely the right time to relieve pressure, or he'll start proxy farming at precisely the right time to like drag out the game to get his team back in it when Shield was behind. And it was due to his great knowledge of map pressure that Shield was able to make a lot of the comebacks. So
how about Ggoong then? Where does Ggoong fit into this?
So yeah, Ggoong, I feel like for Ggoong, like I agree a lot more. I think that like his LeBlanc, like whenever people talked about Ggoong and whenever like I watched Ggoong and he was doing well, he was like on those 2 champions.
Isn't this like a Xiyang scenario again, where he has these couple of champions he's a monster on?
And again, because like I relate a lot of things to China, just because that's the scene that I watch the most. Like I was kind of like thinking a little bit about that when I watched him. It's just like, okay, so what else does he have just show for us? And I think that that's showing off a little bit too. But yeah, that's kind of my take on these 2 players. I do think that Like, I don't think they're bad by any means, for sure. Like, and I do think that they're like both like respectable and like at least in a little bit of the upper echelons of the solo laners. But like they're feeling the pressures of some of the changes a little bit.
Okay, so we've let a little bit of the air out of that one. I mean, they went from being they might be the best at their position to like, well, I'm not going to say they're bad necessarily. They're quite, you know, people are couching their terms here. It's quite interesting. So I want to go into this now. We've talked about players who last season were really good and now maybe aren't as good. Now there's one player last season who was really good this season. His nickname, he's won the spring season twice in OGN. So you're probably going to think his nickname, King of Spring, right? Wrong. The actual English translation says Lord of Spring. I think you're thinking they probably missed a trick there. Nope, Lord of Spring. That's the catchy nickname. Thank you, Korea. So I'm going to talk about dade
King
now.
of Spring on the English cast.
Now, like every one of us arrogant, self-entitled people who thinks they have an opinion that matters more than everyone else in the world, one of the key things is, it's not that we like have our opinion and we can't have our mind changed. It's that as long as our internal rationale makes sense, just because someone else tells us something, we're not just going to accept it. Okay, it has to make sense to us, and once we can figure out a way it makes sense, then we'll adopt the new opinion. Okay, so I think a lot of us, and I'm guessing Monty's in this, I think we've even had this conversation, was in this group, thought to himself, okay, yes, if dade's on certain champions, he's the best. If he's in this team, he's the best. But if you had to just put them skill-wise up against each other, Faker's still the more complete player, Faker's still the greater player. You know, Faker will endure. And so, even with Blue beating SK Telecom, you could still rationalize this. Okay, yeah, but Blue's a better team. Right now, their team fits better in the meta. Certain players are playing better. Spirit's playing better than Bengi. You can make all these cases in the world. But then Monty, and I'm going to present this in a sarcastic, facetious manner because I don't know how else to do it, but I'll present it the way that Reddit people would present this to you, Monty. So you know the whole time I'm sort of like winking a little bit like, I don't really believe this. So what happened was dade actually called out Faker. He said, Faker, you're a bitch. Meet me at Baron 1v1. Don't bring anyone with you. I'll kill all your family. And he was like, Faker was like, I accept the challenge, dade, but we will fight this on my terms. I will pick my best champions right now, and you will pick. No, you've just ruined the whole story, Monty. I was setting up I will pick my best champions, who I am the best at now, and if you defeat me, I shall surely grant you the title Lord of Spring. And then they went to the Baron, they played the 1v1, and listen, it was a fucking amazing set of matches.
It was sick.
Yeah, it was really good. But here's the thing, dade won. He beat Faker on his best champions, the best tools Faker had in the toolkit. And so now we all agree, discussion over, dade is the king of the world. He is now set to be the best player ever. And I mean, I pretty much summed it up all right there, Monty. There wasn't any extenuating circumstance or anything, right?
There's no other. There's not any other way to understand that. I don't think.
Okay, but coming into the summoning insight zone now, so the lights sort of dim, and an evil shadow goes across Monty's face. A lit cigarette is placed into his mouth. What would you now tell us the conspiracy? What really happened, Monty?
Well, the fans picked the champions. So, I mean, it's not like they had... I mean, Faker was on Riven and Zed, who were highly nerfed, so that was a little bit problematic. And dade got his potent champions, and it's a 1v1. It doesn't mean anything at all, ever.
What do you think, Kelsey?
It's not the game. It's like... If you're playing a team game where you have certain threats in terms of jungle and you have this concept of pressure and all these other different complex factors, that you just can't like isolate it into like a 1v1 game of basketball and like decide that player is a better player at a team game. It's just ridiculous. But it was fun to watch. Like, I'm not trying to take away anything. It was cool. I'm glad it happened. But not really indicative.
What do you think, Kelsey?
Yeah, I think the big thing that, like you mentioned, was the champions were huge, and I do think that, like, if we're talking about champions, if like Yasuo and TF and then like all of dade's champions got nerfed again, like they did at Worlds, and the Riot was conspiring against him, then we definitely, like, I think it would hurt him a lot more than like Faker had his champions nerfed, obviously, because we saw Riven and Zed nerfed, and he's still like good because he can just pick up another champion, and he can style on Xiyang with Syndra. But so I think that's like a massive factor. And
frankly, I wouldn't want to play Riven into Rise. Like, that's like...
Yeah.
I figured it surprisingly well at that matchup where Riven is basically just like rune prisoned and poked. Like, that's really
by the way, one of my highlights, because I almost enjoyed the fan reaction as much as the amazing games. One of my favorite comments, because you know how there's always that guy on Reddit. Somehow it's the same guy. His username changes every time. That guy who's just not impressed with whatever godlike play the best players in the world have just done. So someone made a comment like, wow, Faker's animation cancelling is godlike on Riven, which we all know it is. And someone made a comment like, nah, not really. It's like, come on, man. What the fuck? Like, what?
It's just average animation cancelling.
Just a perfect comment, though. Like, you couldn't even make it. That's like better than a parody account would put, you know, like...
I love that with that shit whenever it happens. And people always, like, they try and pick it apart, like, oh yeah, like, you know, any Diamond 1 player can do that on that champion. I'm like, okay, maybe mechanically, yes, but would they make that decision at that time with that level of awareness, or like spatial awareness of the rest of the map? They just like pick this like tiny thing in isolation and try and be like, aha, but it wasn't that impressive. You're like, okay, I mean, sure. You know, if we take some, you know, great like basketball player who's coming up for the dunk, and he, you know, his dribbling as he's coming up to the dunk, you'd be like, oh yeah, you know, I could probably dribble like that. And then he just comes up and, you know, shatters the backboard and everything. It's like, you look at it's just ridiculous.
The thing as well about the 1v1 thing is, listen, I'm glad they did it because those games are awesome. Just like the SOAS Wicked one was fun in its own way, you know. It was like an awesome match to see. We all wanted to see that matchup. But it is so alien to a game, not least because... Let's face it, the one thing people always complain about me on this show is that when I compare players 1v1, right? And yet the same fans are now comparing someone 1v1 in only a 1v1 match. Like, the whole principle at League of Legends now, especially for a position like mid, is you don't just play against the other guy. You play against the whole team, especially if you're in a carry position, you know. So to give you an example, let's say 2 basketball players did play 1v1. Well... even if they're from the same position, well, if one of them's taller and weighs more, then he could win just by backing the other guy down all the time, using his physical advantage. Meanwhile, let's say the other guy actually is like a way better shooter. Now he doesn't even have to go past the guy. He can just shoot all day. So you can see that it wouldn't apply the same way as it would in a game. You know, one guy might win all the time in the game, but in the 1v1 he might lose all the time. So yeah, I'm not really sure it'll count that much. Also, I think unfortunately, Dade's kind of in that realm of the Save and Ggoong scenario. Not as badly, but listen, if Yasuo goes completely out of the meta now, and certain champions come back into them, let's say Zed got super buffed up again, well, you think we're going to see Dade wrecking everyone's face again? Maybe not. Maybe he just becomes good. Maybe he becomes the 3rd best mid.
Well, Dade is a really good Zed player,
but compared to Faker, though...
No, he's a really good Zed player.
Yeah, that was one of the champions... Like, that because it was constantly banned at Worlds, like that was like also a factor, I think, with him. Yeah, he was pretty good.
But yeah, he's definitely like a very top tier Zed player. But I mean, but regardless, the example, what you're trying to say is that's irrelevant to what you're trying to say, which is that he's still his champion pool is better, but it's like if we take a step back and look at Dade. Yes, he has some new champions. Yes, his Yasuo dominance is new. His Ziggs play, that's something that he's picked up. But then also he kind of just going back to Ryze and TF, right? Which are champions that he always played well, but they're not exactly new additions to his repertoire. And if we look at the breadth of Faker's champion pool, it's significantly larger than what Dade can do, and he can play through significantly more meta changes than Dade can. And Dade already lost a very important champion in his pool when Soraka was nerfed. So, and I haven't seen a replacement for Soraka yet.
How do you see it, Kelsey? How do you compare the two in your mind?
Well, like, I mean, we're talking, and I did already touch on the champion pool, but I feel like we talked about this same kind of 1v1 scenario earlier already when we talked about Xiyang, just talking about like how little 1v1s matter, because like that was a situation where he was able to consistently get the 1v1 with a favorable champion pick, and you saw like how little that mattered. I think that because like if there's a situation where Dade's champion pool is upset by like a couple champions, and then you can effectively ban him out with 3 bans, and or his by champion pool affected, I mean by patches and nerfs, then you can apply some kind of pressure, because like again, what made SK Telecom T1K so good isn't just like Faker and isolation, it's like the Bengi Faker combo. Then I feel like you'll see the effects. Like I feel like Faker has the advantage definitely in that scenario, just in terms of I feel like he's a player that has a longer lifespan in terms of patches, in terms of like what he can do on the map and like his understanding of the map. Not that dade isn't like, oh, I'm gonna go bottom and 1v3 you now with Yasuo. Not that like that's not like wow. Like that's, I feel like there's definitely something to be said also for the fact that he is in some instances better on his best champions than Faker is on his best champions. So, but it's all very subjective and difficult to isolate in a 1v1 situation.
And let's also consider the factor, okay, both times dade has risen to the top like this and been the best in terms of performance just happened to coincide with when he has a jungler who's just risen to being the best in Korea. And people are like, this guy's the best, he's, you know, he's in this area, he's better than everyone. Like, that can't just be overlooked, right?
No, I mean, it's definitely part of it, but I would say that Spirit doesn't spend as much time in the mid lane as some other junglers either, so.
But there's, like, when you say that, like, the fact that he doesn't necessarily spend as much time in the middle lane because he can control, like, other parts of the map, that opens up a whole lot for dade to be able to do as well.
Sure.
So there's that effect there.
Okay, right. Let's do a little bit of LCS, but like I say, first of all, there's not that many games to do about, and then it's also still ongoing this week, so we don't want to go too crazy.
Yeah, until both Super Weeks are over, yeah, we can hold off on that discussion, I think, for the most part.
Okay, what do you think's worth talking about at the moment? Because at the moment, every week, Monty, we have the same story. Like, listen, guys, top 3 are all tied. Next 2 after that are tied. Don't worry, next week, all the answers will come. And then every week, it's like, shit, everyone went 1-1. No resolution there. The dilemma is still in effect. What do you think, Monty? What's the state of NA at the moment? Still the same?
I mean, yeah, nobody's really figured it out. Nobody's really pulling ahead. I mean, we can go back to our conversation about TSM from the last episode too, where, I mean, they did go 1-1 this week they beat CLG very convincingly. So, not too happy about that, but, you know, we came back the next day and beat Dignitas very convincingly. So, it seems like a lot of these teams, there isn't a very clear front runner in the NA LCS yet, and teams, there's consistency in the team's ability to like stay in the top and everything to stay in the same standings at the moment, but not in terms of a team's real dominance or real mastery over the current kind of meta and situation like we're seeing with Samsung Blue in Korea.
Well, what's interesting is I've once heard this really great saying about coaching, which is that this guy said in basketball, like, a lot of the time the best teams win from preparation, knowing what they need to do, knowing what the enemy can do. And so sometimes, you know, a game is actually won before you step on the court. And so when I look at the CLG TSM match, I kind of think like it's a win for coaching, you know. Good coaching gets the better team through. Have I overpressed this point enough? Yeah.
I have to agree with you, because I was actually not on the internet during the time period in which the prep for that match occurred. I was off doing some other stuff.
Oh, default win for then, yeah. Okay.
On vacation.
The guy's a tryhard. What the fuck's he doing?
I would have to say that our preparation for that match was certainly not ideal, and that things, I won't go into it, but things happened that did not make me very happy, and that the team wasn't happy about. And then as soon as that match ended, I came back, we reviewed that match that night, and we prepped for Dignitas, and things went better. So I'm hoping that now that I'm back in Korea and I'm actually more able to be the coach of CLG again, now that I'm not on vacation and can dedicate more of my time to doing that again, that hopefully we can solve some of these issues and not have games like the TSM game or the Curse game happen again.
Before we go into any speculation, not that this show would ever indulge in such behavior, we've talked a million times about TSM, CLG, LMQ. We talked about all the LCS NA stuff to death. but we've got someone on here who we haven't heard from. What do you think of LCS NA at the moment? What do you think of this situation with the top 3 being tied and the next 2 are just below and no one knows where it's going to shake out? What's your thoughts?
I think that Cloud9 was hurt by the jungle follow a lot. It's something that I don't know if you guys necessarily grow and you don't talk about that a lot. I think that Balls is like a really good player on their team, and the fact that they haven't been able to figure out, like, we just talked about White Shield, we talked about how Save is able to sort of get around it and get an advantage anyway. I feel like they haven't figured out how to get Balls that kind of advantage.
Oh, wait a minute. Are you suggesting that when a star top laner isn't able to be used effectively, we should blame the team but not the player himself? Okay, I'm just keeping track. Check one here. Okay, keep going.
But I think like part of the reason why I'm drawing this comparison is because like Invictus Gaming just lost PD2, who they rely on like very much to constantly like win the lane and free up pressure on the map, and I feel like Cloud9 relied on Balls in like a similar way. And because they haven't figured out how to get him that place in like the jungle, to that place in the jungle follow, that's a similar situation. But
also because it ties up Meteos' time a lot in the early game as well, and Meteos' strength in his mechanics and his ability to make plays and create a lot of pressure on the map isn't really there either in the early game as a result of jungle follow.
Yeah, and so arguably that's like their best players were just hit really hard by that patch as well. That's like a huge thing. We might see, and I feel like that's part of why like Cloud, and like I've talked to someone on LoL Esports who follows NA like much more closely, who has said that he thinks that CLG like loses to Cloud9 in particular, because they allow Cloud9 to still get like their old game, the old way that they do things. So that like with the 1v1s, and they let Meteos have Lee Sin or whatever to give them those advantages.
The fools, when they were learn, they're like China, you know, they just keep doing the same shit over and over again.
But so like that's a gentleman Gustav's insight, I guess, for whatever that's worth. But yeah, but I noticed the thing with like the top laner, I think has hit them hard, so I'm not sure how they will fix that, but hopefully when the new patch comes out, it won't even be that much of an issue. They can figure it out.
So who is the best for you? Because at the moment we've got this stack where people don't want to venture an opinion. So give me your opinion. Who do you feel is the strongest?
Well, see, I am a CLG fan, but I feel like that's like a cop-out, and it'll just make me look like I'm sucking up. So I have to go with Dignitas then.
Okay.
I feel like they've made a lot of strides and a lot of improvements.
So
and
you
maybe
drew Monty in there, and then you just backhanded him away.
It's just like, no, I can't. CLG, I don't know. I've been a CLG fan for a while, kind of like the same way.
Okay. Who's the third team?
Same way.
CLG, Dig, and who?
Third team. That's hard. Like, I don't know. Because I want to say right now, like on this patch, I want to say I'd give it to LMQ, but like on the next patch, probably Cloud9.
So what about TSM and their new star player?
Oh my god, we've got another TSM hater on the show. I've done this. I apologize to everyone. We've criticized TSM again. We are probably trying to get someone's career ended on the team. Who are we trying to get picked this week, Kelsey? I'm trying to figure it out.
We're trying to figure it out.
Okay, no, we should talk about Lustboy though.
Yeah,
no, this is what I want to talk about. No, let's talk about this. Is this happening, Monty? This will probably come out in like a day. So what do you think?
Well, my sources, everything that I hear points to and know about Loco and Lustboy's relationship. Like, they're really close.
Just friends. Just friends. I don't want any rumors getting started.
I don't even talk to Loco, and he talks about Lustboy all the time, so there's that.
Yeah. So just knowing the nature of their close friendship, and also knowing other things, it's not 100%, but I do assume that Lustboy is going to TSM.
I'm so confused. I'm pulling my hair out here because we had Loco Doco on this show. I'm sure it was him, unless it was like some sort of like demon possessed him and made him say this stuff. And he was telling me like, listen, Glebe, will be a top 3 support in this league when I'm finished with him. Well, he didn't say when I'm finished. He sort of said, like, with the right coaching, you know, like, if I was to be hired tomorrow, please, Reggie, then Glebe would be really good. I could take that Glebe guy off your hands, make him really good. And then he believed in Glebe. And if you didn't believe in Glebe, you actually hate freedom, the American way. You hate the existence of Riot Games and League of Legends itself. Like, in fact, Mark Merrill is a personal friend of Glebe, and you hate him as well. You don't want his friend to succeed. I don't know why you're like this, Monty. I tried to get through to you, reason, but you just hate on this young man. You try to make him retire, like when I made Niantonso retire. I mean, you know, remember that famous statement where he said, Thorin made me retire. I couldn't handle the comments. He was just... You know, Monty would make me sit up at night like Malcolm from Clockwork Orange with matchsticks under my eyes watching Summoning Insight, and I was like, please, I want to turn away. And he was like, no, you must listen to Thorin's criticisms of you as a player, which secretly imply you are a bad person. So anyway, like that, we've been trying to make Glebe, you know, quit by any means necessary, but for some reason he's hanging in there. He's still playing Thresh and stuff. Why would they pick Lustboy over Glebe? Please just explain it to me, Monty. What do you think?
I actually don't know.
Like, as a player, like, you know, here's another thing. I'm being serious on this point. People are now going to go crazy, the Korean lovers. And we'll listen, just because me and Monty think Korea is the best, we're not like the people who tell you shit like Apto would be better than Faker and everyone in all of LCS West. Like, we're not that good.
That's the WE Academy.
That's the equivalent.
The Academy conspiracy.
Those are the hipsters of Korea. Okay?
It's in every league.
Yeah. So we don't go that far, okay? So as a result, when Helios comes over...
The Apto conspiracy, the Incarnation conspiracy, like...
So when Helios comes over to the West, when Lustboy comes over to the West, we don't actually say, oh, well, you know what? Fuck all those supports in NA. Lustboy is instantly the best. In fact, you know what? He's the best Western support. Like, he's Korean, man. Like, you know, we criticized Helios before. Where was Lustboy when he left Korea for you? And, like, how do you think he'll fit in?
I think Lustboy was a very mediocre, middle-tier Korean support. I think that he always has had a relatively small champion pool. I think that his playstyle has been kind of stubborn in the way that he's played with a lot of his AD carries, and he seems to not be very flexible in terms of meshing with an AD carry. And so while he was fine with Emperor, like there were obviously traditionally, you know, those massive problems with him and Captain Jack where it's just so awkward to watch them in laning phase together. So with that in mind, it does seem to me that if this goes down, and it's possible that Lustboy will only be kind of, they might just like sub him in for some games or try him out, or maybe this won't be a, you know, clearly they're probably going to be working on this to see if it works at all. But we're halfway through the season right now. Worlds is coming out. Are you going to take a gamble that, you know, AD support synergy is so important? Are you going to try and rebuild that with a guy who doesn't speak fluent English halfway through the season and right before Worlds? To me, as a coach, I would not make that decision.
So but what you're saying is, like, whoa, we're halfway there. Loco's living on a prayer.
Well, also, and like you said, it's the other confusing thing is that we're not talking like, it's not like they got Mata, right?
Yeah.
Because if you get Mata, you're like, wow, okay, well, maybe if Mata spoke good enough English, if we could get Mata now, because we know he's such a definitive shot caller, because he's mechanically good, because we know he's got a great champion pool, because we know that he can transform the team play aspect of the team. You know, why not just like that would actually kind of make sense to take that level of risk. But Lustboy has not been, you know, we know that Flame and Ambition are the personalities on Blaze. These are the guys who are the ones who are dictating the way that the team plays in the game, and that we know that Lustboy has not always gelled very well with certain AD carries, and like I said, hasn't demonstrated that flexibility. He was fine with Emperor. He was fine, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be fine with every AD carry on the planet. So I think there's some concern there with adapting to a new carry, which is also just magnified by the short time frame. Like any support, no matter how well they are, how flexible they are, I think would have a difficult time under these circumstances. So if this all goes through, and especially the other thing too, because Loco was so convinced that Glebe was going to improve dramatically, why would you take this risk? I don't quite understand. Like I said, it is a risk. That's exactly what it is. It could pay off big. It could, but it's not a decision that I would make.
What do you think, Kelsey? Lustboy to TSM.
Obviously, he's going to be a sub because Loco would never do that to Glebe. No, I don't.
Okay, I can already drew you into our bullshit. Okay. Good stuff.
But I don't think that. I think that it could be a good move. It might just be like the feedback loop of the fans, like creating this sense of, like, TSM players aren't allowed to look at social media. Never mind, I'm not. But but I guess I'm just struggling because I don't have a good answer, and like I feel like I should have a better answer because I get this question all the time. Like, why would you import this random Korean player? And like World Elite Academy, for example, we just talked about them, is getting 2 Korean players now because it's like a shot in the dark and a desperation. And I feel like maybe the issue is that TSM is like honestly terrified that they might not be top 3, and so they almost feel like they don't have a lot to lose. But I don't think they're in that spot, so that doesn't make any sense to me.
I don't think they're in that spot either.
So yeah, I honestly don't have a good answer.
I think that's a good theory, actually, though, that it's a potential desperation move. The problem with it is, okay, it's like this. Think about it this way. It's probably correct that they weren't in the top 3 right now overall in terms of like the best 3 teams. Like no one, like even when you were umming and ahhing, like should I have LMQ, should I have C9 as my 3rd best team? You weren't saying, man, I think TSM's right up there and I should probably, like they were kind of like, if it was going to be one of those 2, it wasn't going to be a TSM. I think most people who aren't a TSM fan would say the same, okay? So as a result, you can say, okay, they were outside the top 3, but the problem, I would frame it like this. The risk and hope that it'll be better with Lustboy and how much that would have to go well is way less likely to happen than whatever little changes you needed to take yourself from, say you were 4th now, to the 3rd spot. What do you think, Monty?
I think it's so hard to say. Like, because...
like, wouldn't you rather work with a known quantity as a coach and just try and get that better than introduce a new element all of a sudden?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, I would rather do that personally. I would rather not, especially in a situation where it's your duo lane, where you need that synergy in the laning phase. It's not like hot swapping a solo laner, which would be, in my opinion, easier. Support has a large duty in terms of map awareness and controlling the AD carry and giving the AD carry knowledge in lane while the AD carry focuses on CSing. That is not so easy, I think. And especially just because of the kind of player I know that Lustboy is, it does make me a little bit leery for TSM that they would be considering this kind of move.
So I'll leak you in. Okay.
And also because Glebe is legitimately improving.
Sure.
This is a true statement as well. So when you already have somebody who, as far as from my knowledge, not having ever met Glebe or observed Glebe myself, but word on the street is the rumors are that he's very dedicated. He has a good attitude. He has a good work ethic.
Even his name's improved.
And yeah, even his name's improved. And he's shown in-game improvement. So with all of these factors going well for you.
What do you think, Kelsey?
I was going to, I don't know if I'm allowed to ask questions or not,
yeah,
but I was going to ask if, could you elaborate a bit more on like knowing the type of player? Did you just mean in terms of like he doesn't necessarily synergize well with everyone, or did you have more in mind?
No. I don't think that he has that. Lustboy has a bad attitude or anything. That's not my impression of him.
Well, yeah, I just mean maybe the sense of his game knowledge or something like that, or just like his shot calling. I don't know.
Well, I mean, we all know how Blaze's shot calling goes. So But I also don't think that he was a major part of those decisions. Again, I do think that was controlled very much by Flame and Ambition. So it may be, and in fact, Helios was also shackled by the Flame and Ambition dominance over that team to a certain degree. But so I don't know exactly what his game knowledge is. From what Loco tells me, it's good. And then in terms of his shot calling abilities, who knows? Because I doubt he ever got a chance to really shot call.
I mean, listen, Lustboy, we all remember him back in his heyday when he was sort of like okay, you know that guy where if you go out drinking with them, they get a bit too drunk and they start like fights with people even though they're not actually good at fighting. He was like the smooth talker friend that you always need in the group who can talk the other guy out of the fight. Captain Jack would be in laning phase about to get the shit beaten out of him on the wall, and Lustboy would come in on his Lulu, and he'd fire some butterflies and some nice spells and some magic, and he'd distract you, and he'd bodyguard Captain Jack to 20 minutes, and then Captain Jack would sober up a bit, get his shit together, become a real man, and stand up for himself. So yeah, he was a good player. Where was I going with that?
That was a long time ago, and I think the stylistic mismatch between Lustboy's aggression and Captain Jack's lane passiveness is well documented and well known by many fans. So he definitely, when Emperor showed up, Lustboy, they looked much more comfortable paired with each other.
That said, do you think, do you have any indication that of what kind of player Wildturtle would be with him? Like, do you think that because Wildturtle is a bit more aggressive that he would match well then?
Potentially. I think that there's definitely, if I had to say whether this was if that synergy was going to be more like Captain Jack or more like Emperor, I'd definitely go on the Emperor side of things for sure. Emperor also known for at times wild over aggression, aggressive use of flash, aggressive use of summoner spells, and Turtle definitely has a similar style.
Emperor would get something in his mind and he'd attack and he'd hang on like a pit bull and you couldn't get him off, Actually, that's reminded me of what my point was going to be. I have another little tidbit I'll tease for future reflections, the Samsung ones that I did. So I spoke to a Samsung support and a Samsung AD carry, and I was asking them about Western players that they like. And believe it or not, they only named a couple, and among the couple that both named was Wildturtle, and they both said they thought this guy was really good, and actually they made it sound like they assumed he was one of the best players in the West, So I actually think I'm interested. I wonder if that means they knew already, because I only did these interviews like a day ago. So I wonder if that means they knew already that Lustboy was going there, or I wonder why they would even know that much or watch that much, because in general they said they don't watch LCS much,
Wildturtle did have a good performance at Worlds last year.
Yeah.
On TSM in the group stage. As TSM didn't do well as a team, but Turtle's individual performance was quite strong.
I felt like that was their bottom lane seemed to win consistently against everyone, and of course they had the Corki thing going for them, and Wildturtle is a Corki player, but I thought that was.
I think that's actually probably where that's coming from.
Yeah, they were the highlight of their team at Worlds for sure.
If they were watching most of this season, they would not be saying that. Turtle has stepped it up recently, got MVP last week. He definitely is looking a lot better, but you watch the first few weeks of this split, you would not be saying that.
Okay, so I think we've covered everything here, because the thing is, even though LCS EU we didn't touch on, it's still ongoing, and I think next week we'll probably have a big breakdown like Alliance and all this, because obviously it's an interesting story there, but let's let it develop a bit. I think we're pretty much done for this episode. Do you have anyone you'd like to thank, Kelsey, or say hello to?
Just a few people, I guess, in the Chinese scene who do really good work, if you guys are interested in that stuff. I mentioned Frostgren, who does good casting, Michael Drexen Layler. I might even be butchering his name because it might be Makale or whatever. But then there's Cubo Soldier Shim, who used to write for Paravine. I think he's kind of moving away from that. But and then just good stuff. So, and watch the LPL English cast maybe in the future. Right now, it's kind of not so good, but maybe that's a good reason to watch it now too. But it's developing. It's a project. It's in process.
And the Twitch link is twitch.tv/LPLEN, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. So.
Good stuff.
Anything to
and
say,
also
Monty?
watch your podcast too. Your China ball.
Let's get those viewers up.
Yeah, the 50 viewers.
I mean, if you want to make it more like this show, just pause the VOD after one of them makes a really good point, and then just make like an obnoxious joke about whatever they just said, and then segue into just press play again, and the next thing will start. You'll feel just like this show.
I mean, like Cubo already is being called like mini Thorin, so
R.I.P. to his career. I'm not sure everyone can survive that. It's not really the path you want to go. I have some reservations myself, you know.
So we're on our way, right? You mentioned that it's like 5 MonteCristos, but we have our mini Thorin. So there you go.
Well, on that bombshell, I think we'll just end it there. So see everyone next week for Summoning Insight. If I still have a website or whatever, I'll figure something out. Bye.